Chapter 161. Cathedral. 4. And so, the French merchants began an unexpected wine trade. On one side, loading various artworks and building materials ordered from Virginia. On the other side, loading wine produced in Bordeaux, Burgundy, and Provence. And this has gone bad. Can't buy it. Why did they suddenly bring so much wine? It was all disposed of. Let me say it again. The beginning of long-term wine preservation is divided into two main developments. First, the emergence of fortified wine, which increases alcohol content by adding spirits. These wines have a much higher alcohol content than regular wines, making them much more advantageous for preservation. Second, the emergence of a method that prevents wine from turning into vinegar by adding sulfites. Sulfites prevent bacteria growth in wine containers, keeping wine fresh for extended periods. And these preservation methods developed from the 17th century when Europeans began to venture outside Europe in earnest. The addition of sulfites only became widespread in the 20th century. So what does that mean? Tui, this taste spoiled. To think they really believed we would buy such things. It means that wine from this era mostly turns into vinegar after a short time. If they had used clippers, maybe, but this is wine that came across the water in the conventional way, taking 2 to 3 months. There's no way it could still be in good condition. Well, don't be too harsh, Eleanor. If we didn't have our own wine, we would have had to buy and drink this. Anyway, wine is an inseparable element of Christian life. Just before Jesus was arrested, he shared the Last Supper with his disciples, declaring bread and wine to be his body and blood before being crucified. Since then, Christians regardless of denomination have performed the Eucharist or communion ceremony with bread and wine at least once, reflecting on the meaning of Jesus' suffering and death. Among them, in Catholicism only the priest drinks the wine used in the Eucharist, while Protestants share the wine among all believers. It's terrible. If we held communion with this, the Lord would be angry. Is it that bad? Would you like to try it? Then, ugh, it has to taste good. Doesn't it? We all share and drink this together. These French people who served this kind of wine to us as wine have therefore committed blasphemy against the Lord and should be rightfully condemned. Phew, I had many strange thoughts. Walter, please tell the merchants waiting over there that we can't pay full price for this. It's a shame to throw it away, so we'll use it as vinegar, but it has no value beyond that. I understand. Well, it's natural for wine to spoil while crossing the Atlantic. But our wine doesn't do that, does it? Mrs. Dare, that's because we're using Nemo's mysterious technology. They couldn't possibly replicate it. That's right. For them to replicate our wine, they would have to wait more than 300 years. Of course, fortified wine will come out soon, so they'll soon be able to export wine across the Atlantic, but not yet. Wait a moment, Walter. What is it? Raleigh stops as he was about to move on my order. I take out Virginia-made wine that I had brought for comparison and hand it to him. Let them taste this. Pardon. Let them try it. Then something incredible will happen. Ah, I understand. Looking bewildered, Raleigh takes the wine I handed to him and leaves. It is said that wine is 90% terroir, soil, and 10% production technique. In that sense, wine made in Virginia is thoroughly beaten by France from the start. But this wine, this Chesapeake wine, is different. Yes, just by the name, it sounds really insignificant. In fact, by 21st century wine industry standards, it is very insignificant. But now is different. Because, my God, how can it be this intense? How can wine be this sweet? What technique did they use? This is the world's first fortified wine. The primitive 17th century French people did backflips over American wine. Gulp, gulp. Yo, your majesty, if you drink it down like that. Cough.
Impossible.
Is this wine really from across the Atlantic?
Yes.
Look here. Doesn't it say Chesapeake? Chesapeake Scuppernong 1592. Imjin War Edition.
Ingenoir, guerre d'Ingent?
What's that? Anyway, Henri, his face slightly flushed, stared intensely at the wine from that distant new world, in shock. That wine could maintain this quality even after crossing the Atlantic was shocking enough, but it had a taste he had never thought to experience in wine. Sweet, with a very high alcohol content. He had never even heard of such wine before. How is this possible? Did the English teach them winemaking? That can't be. How could people who struggle even with grape cultivation, let alone winemaking, teach anyone? If they knew how to make such a product, would the English have any reason to import large quantities of wine from France every year? Then, how did such a product come about? And 1592 is already 10 years ago, isn't it? Does this mean that it was made with grapes harvested 10 years ago and is still fine? Your Majesty, are you all right? Is it perhaps poisoned? Maxime, you try it too. What? Just a moment. WH what? 10 years ago. Wasn't that when the English Virginia colony wasn't this large yet, just a few hundred people? They made wine with the help of the English at that time? How could that be possible? They already knew how to make wine. Henry's words fail him. The fact that they already knew how to make such wine 10 years ago means they had already had contact with Europe before, or at least knew how to brew wine. And the fact that, 10 years ago, their wine production and preservation technology was superior to France's. They have known Christianity longer than we thought. There's no other explanation. For what purpose and how would they make wine if not for Christian purposes? Only then do numerous pieces of information fit together in Henry's mind. Europeans didn't know the identity of this Christian empire all this time. A Christian civilization that had developed metallurgy, jewel crafting, farming methods, and winemaking techniques superior to Europe's had been invisible to their eyes until then. And only about 10 years ago, it suddenly appeared to the world, majestically displaying its power, making Spain and England tremble at its might. Their intentions, their identity, Henri couldn't even guess. More than anything, what does Imgen War Edition de Guerre d'Imgen mean? He would never know. Chapter 162, Voiceless Emperor 1. I'm concerned you might be expecting too much. Henri IV is currently trying to reduce the importation of foreign luxury goods to minimize the outflow of national wealth. I've already heard this several times and seen it in the catalogue. Henri IV is the king who ended the Huguenot wars that spanned decades and inherited a ruined France. With his trusted advisor Maximilien de Bethune, he implemented reforms and had to frantically raise funds in various sectors to rebuild France. As such, he was very vigilant about unnecessary expenditures and wouldn't welcome luxury goods from foreign countries. But that's not important. Walter, the specific quantity isn't important. What matters is only the symbolism. The symbolism that wine made from grapes I carefully cultivated is now making the French king tremble is what mattered most. This is the moment American wine finally makes its global debut. Of course, I couldn't say such things to Raleigh, so I just vaguely mumbled the rest. I see, so it's primarily about letting the French know that we too belong to Christian civilization. Also, for now, just making them aware of our wine's existence and characteristics might be enough. Since it's a wine that can be preserved long-term, it would be hard to replace. Then, whether it's Raleigh or others, they conveniently invent deep strategic intentions that never existed. I just nod appropriately and smile. And others also turned their attention elsewhere, as there were more pressing topics than my words at the moment. The amount of incoming luxury goods has increased? That's right, Hewitt. Thanks to that, we've reduced a lot of effort in building the cathedral. The stonemasons told me the quality of marble has improved significantly. The attitude of French merchants has somehow changed from before. They're much more cooperative, you could say. Or perhaps they're trying harder to make a good impression. I tried to infer what changes might have occurred within France, but the sea of the 17th century was too vast to discover affairs across the Atlantic. So that's on hold for now. Isn't it important that the cathedral is being built well because of that? Well, that's true. I nodded appropriately at Raleigh's words and looked up at the cathedral building where columns were rising one by one. Naturally, this cathedral is expected to take decades to complete. But we plan to quickly build spaces that can be used adequately first, so the area won't remain idle in the meantime. Plus, with the help of excavators and various equipment, the pace will accelerate. Still, among the apostles here, probably none will see this space completed. Maybe Eleanor has a chance. Suddenly my mouth feels a bit bitter. As I frowned, Raleigh approached to check my expression. I waved my hand casually and made an excuse. What's wrong? Nothing. I just realized, aren't we officially Church of England? I wondered if we should invite a priest. Of course, it's an unnecessary worry. It's not like we're going to spread rumors everywhere about building this. And England, with its many Puritans, wouldn't particularly care either. But after hearing my words and contemplating briefly, Eleanor made a suggestion. Well, since she's nearby, how about inviting Her Majesty the Queen? She is the head of the Church of England. I'm not sure. We don't know how she'll react upon meeting Nemo. Raleigh replied while stroking his beard and looked at me. Her Majesty has been expressing a desire to meet Nemo. To be precise, she seems to be feeling bored with life on Roanoke. Please explain in detail, Walter. She's confined to Roanoke Island without knowing why, isn't she? She seems quite frustrated. Yes, of course it would be difficult to meet her.
No.
Actually, it's problematic not to meet her as well. It's troublesome to give the impression that we're detaining Elizabeth. The alliance with England is still important. Plus, a foreign monarch has entered my territory, and I haven't shown my face at all? This is extremely rude in its own way. Elizabeth is being patient with me. After thinking for a moment, I asked Raleigh, how is the Queen these days? It had been truly a turbulent life. Born as the daughter of the hated Queen and Boleyn, and watching her be beheaded. From being heir to the throne, to falling to a mere prisoner. Living in fear, experiencing mortal danger several times. And she had triumphed in a lifelong struggle. Now it was she who lay peacefully, reclining in an armchair. Not her damned sister Mary, not her sickly brother Edward. It was she who reigned as Queen of England, Ireland, and Scotland. The irritating Spain was also being tormented to the maximum extent, so it couldn't be more satisfying. Or could it? Elizabeth frowned at the sudden thought, her delicate brow furrowing as she absently tapped her jeweled fingers against the polished oak of her writing desk. Her attendants, keen observers trained to anticipate her every need and mood, exchanged subtle glances before quietly slipping from the room, the rustle of their silk gowns barely audible as they retreated to the antechamber to await her orders. The heavy door closed with a soft click, leaving her alone with her contemplations. Some might call it reckless for the head of the church and ruler of the kingdom to be abroad, venturing beyond the protective walls and vigilant guards of her own palace. Especially in a land where an enemy colony was within reach, where Spanish sympathizers might lurk in shadowed corners or behind courteous smiles, their loyalty pledged to a foreign crown that had long contested England's power and prosperity. But her judgment was clearly rational and cold, honed by years of political maneuvering and the constant threats that surrounded her throne. She analyzed risks with the precision of a master chess player, several moves ahead of her opponents. As long as the Spanish king had a minimum of common sense, and despite their differences, she knew him to be no fool in matters of statecraft, she was in no danger at all. The diplomatic consequences would far outweigh any momentary advantage. Chapter 163, Voiceless Emperor. 2. First of all, Spain had nothing to gain by threatening her. The delicate balance of power that had been established would not tilt in their favor through such a brazen act. They couldn't induce political chaos in England since there was a separate joint king, whose authority would remain undiminished even in her absence, ensuring continuity of governance and a swift, terrible retribution should any harm befall her. Moreover, by now Spain must be yearning for peace, if only from exhaustion. The country's treasury had been drained by years of costly conflicts across multiple fronts. They had many enemies more important than England, the Ottoman Empire pressing at their Mediterranean territories, rebellious provinces in the Low Countries consuming resources and manpower, and rivals circling their colonial possessions like hungry wolves. A provocative move against her would only serve to unite their opponents and further isolate Spain in European affairs. In such a situation, they wouldn't choose to prolong the war with England by capturing her, killing her, or doing anything else to her. Therefore, Elizabeth was safe. Therefore, there was no reason for Elizabeth's actions to be restricted. Therefore, there was no reason for Elizabeth to be confined to this island. Like some prisoner. Yes, like a prisoner. Unpleasant memories briefly surfaced. Memories of being treated like a prisoner before. Just as Elizabeth was revisiting the bitter past, recalling past pain and past hatred. Knock, knock, knock. Your Majesty, Sir Drake requests an audience. The attendant's voice. Let him in. And as she responded, the door opened and a man with a cheerful countenance walked in. Your Majesty, I have come at your summons. As Elizabeth gestured with her chin toward the chair across the table, Drake sat down and immediately addressed the Queen. Your Majesty, may I speak directly? Go ahead. Meeting the Emperor is madness. You must stop immediately. What? Elizabeth tilted her head. What is he saying? After claiming he had met him himself? Thinking it might be another of his typical nonsensical ramblings, she looked up to meet Drake's eyes. But his unusually serious eyes left her speechless. Drake did not speak at length. There is a secret there that I cannot explain in words. You must neither set foot there carelessly nor speak to the people there recklessly. And you? I'm fine since I'm a hardy seafarer. What about Raleigh? Similar to my case. You could say he's already accustomed to the sea's pranks. Silence again. I summoned him thinking I might seek advice before meeting the native emperor, but he just says strange things. You mustn't take this lightly. You absolutely must be careful. What exactly is happening? I really didn't want to tell you this, but the Emperor's true identity is probably? He must be a sea monster. No. Until just now, he was speaking quite sensibly. After meeting him, you will have bizarre experiences that are difficult to describe in words. Even I have been seeing hallucinations more frequently since meeting him. Of course, that's due to vitamin deficiency from happily sailing around without going to England. Then after he gave me some strange medicine, those visions dispersed instantly. Perhaps the mystery of the sea was testing me. It was a vitamin supplement. Anyway, you must be careful. Your Majesty, I don't want to lose you. Aren't you the one to whom I've presented numerous treasures and offered affection and respect all this time? He means he's paid a lot in tribute, so please live long enough to be worth it. After that, England's proud naval leader Francis Drake passionately expounded for 30 minutes on all sorts of mysterious dangers one might experience at sea. Thanks to that, Elizabeth was able to vividly see how far the human mind could deteriorate due to causes such as vitamin deficiency or excess adrenaline. I understand your words well. Then, however, am I not a monarch of a nation? Whatever dangers may come, whoever the counterpart may be, if I must meet them, I shall. You may go now. Elizabeth quickly gave up on the idea of having a proper conversation. Indeed, one shouldn't attempt to converse with someone who's slightly off. Felt like common sense was crumbling. The Queen shook her head, and Drake left the room with a regretful expression. And he thought to himself, the Queen is indeed a strange person. After all those warnings, she still wants to meet the mystery of the sea. There's no point in a sensible person like myself having a lengthy conversation. Thus, the most nonsensical man and woman in England shook their heads thinking about each other, while Elizabeth and Drake were filming a farce thinking about each other. Why not capture the Queen? Another farce was unfolding across the Atlantic. As mentioned earlier, Elizabeth's safety is guaranteed despite being far away. Spain has many enemies, and as such, England is pushed down the priority list, and attacking a queen who isn't even on English soil should have been even further outside the priorities. The Queen is on Roanoke Island, you say? Why yes, your majesty. Then wouldn't the war end if we captured the queen? Pardon. That's why the ministers were shocked when Philip III spoke. Your majesty, the queen may not have many days left to live anyway. But if we threaten England's queen in this situation, England will never be able to surrender. Who said anything about killing her? Didn't I just say to capture her as a prisoner? Things wouldn't proceed so easily. From the perspective of England's joint King James, Elizabeth is a thorn in his side. Even if she were captured as a prisoner, he would have no reason to be concerned for her welfare. If Elizabeth were to die of old age, England would have changed dynasties, so various conditions could be attached to bring about the end of the war. But now a kidnapping? An attack? It's a foolish idea. It needed to be stopped immediately. But there was not a trace of hesitation or retreat in the king's words. Duke of Lerma, what do you think? Of course it's reasonable. It's not wrong to see this as the last opportunity to end the war with England advantageously. And the king's final break, the Duke of Lerma, Francisco de Sandoval y Rojas, also moderately agreed, bringing despair to everyone. The Duke of Lerma was more urgently concerned with the immediate capital relocation project and real estate hoarding. We must strike now when we're gaining ground in Ireland. Prepare the fleet and soldiers to capture her immediately. And Philip III, having received confirmation from his favorite, became even more jubilant. In the name of the Lord, we shall bring divine punishment upon that heretic queen. There's no way things would go like that. Everyone trembled with anxiety. Chapter 164. Voiceless Emperor. 3. We began to take steps to face Elizabeth. The point is to greet the queen with proper courtesy. Isn't it? That's right. And it's important not to reveal my true identity. Exactly. Of course, the moment my identity is revealed to the outside world, everyone here would not only be excommunicated but might become public enemies of European society. A living angel and his followers, it's impossible to gauge how existing religious authorities would react. Anyway, since Elizabeth, who claims to be the head and defender of the Church of England, also belongs to those existing religious authorities, there could be no greater foolishness than revealing everything honestly. Yet she's also not someone who can be simply confined or released like other exploration parties or merchants. The issue regarding Elizabeth was much more complicated than I had thought. Eventually, I had to meet Elizabeth. And how to meet her was the important question. Ahem. Would you like to try speaking once? Like this? Yes. Keep writing for now. Above all, the Queen is fluent in Latin, French, Spanish, Italian, Greek, Dutch, Welsh, Gaelic, and so on. Her hobby was even translating classics, which says it all. If I uttered even one word in front of such a queen, it would be over immediately. Therefore, from today, I am an unfortunate man who recently suffered from a high fever and sadly lost his voice. Although my ability doesn't apply to what I write, fortunately, it's been over 10 years since I fell into this era. By now, I can speak English and Latin without much difficulty. So, communication between me and Elizabeth can be done through written notes. That's how I solved the most complicated issue of direct confrontation, and just in case, I instructed Raleigh to subtly probe Elizabeth. Your Majesty? Come to think of it, didn't the saints receive revelations from an angel in this area? Well, it's a made-up story, but yes. I was quite surprised at how skillfully both of them fabricated the story. Of course, because it wasn't a made-up story. That ordinary young women could lie so deftly. Haha. Perhaps they would have done well as actresses. Of course, because it wasn't a lie. Anyway, Raleigh says he entertained the Queen while sweating nervously.
Yes.
I was also very surprised. How well they made up stories about a fictional angel. Indeed, an angel. I'd like to see one myself, or even a demon, for that matter. Is that so? Even a demon, not just an angel. Aren't you curious? Whether such beings actually exist? Good heavens! for the head of the church to utter such atheistic words. Just don't let such remarks leak outside. Then Elizabeth reportedly responded with a laugh. Ah, you just need to watch your mouth. Although, I'm sure my Walter wouldn't do such a thing. Anyway, Raleigh's conclusion from his conversation with the Queen, Her Majesty, was quite outspoken. Well, if she's willing to fabricate stories about angels and saints so freely, that goes without saying. Anyway, I don't know if she has such tendencies, but she didn't seem likely to sacrifice political interests for religious beliefs. Her Majesty is very secular. The head of the church, secular? Is that allowed? Charitably speaking, is she modern? No. Even in the 21st century, if the British monarch were such a skeptic, it would make front-page news. What's modern about that? Let's just say she's somewhat free-spirited. Anyway, we were gradually completing our preparations. Should we hide the tractor? Is that necessary? Rather, having such things might make Her Majesty think, this much is necessary for a native emperor. To maintain the fantasy of a native empire with overwhelmingly superior culture compared to Europe, we don't hide the steam tractors and various equipment. Rather, we display them prominently. But still, the setting is supposed to be the emperor of a great empire, and going like this, it would be stranger if Europeans hadn't discovered such structures until now. Also, it's forbidden to hastily construct or fabricate something like the emperor's palace. Trying to deceive clumsily might only arouse suspicion. The important thing isn't how plausible it looks to Elizabeth's eyes. Even if Elizabeth thinks, aren't these just barbarians? It doesn't really matter. I've already given her enormous treasures, and the Queen would be satisfied with that. What's important is to prevent statements like, these Satan followers must all be burned. I just want to live comfortably too. Equals. Elizabeth had been experiencing many strange things lately. Sir Drake, I hear that the Emperor recently suffered from a severe fever and lost his voice. Please convey my sympathies to him. I cannot communicate with the mystery of the sea for long, so I'll ask Baron Walter Raleigh to do it instead. By the way, did you know that Spaniards saw a giant squid in that sea? When the Emperor's story came up, for some reason Francis Drake would sweat profusely and change the subject. The Queen felt perplexed by his attitude but didn't make much of it. After all, seafarers are all strange people. Come to think of it, didn't you say last time that you'd like to confirm whether angels or demons exist? Suddenly, it just came to mind. If a being appeared that was difficult to distinguish whether it was an angel or a demon, what would you do? Then she felt a similar bewilderment from Walter Raleigh. She knew that Walter Raleigh was a devout Protestant, but he hadn't actively shown that aspect in front of her many times before, had he? Didn't he even keep atheist friends close? For example, if someone's behavior and character are like an angel's, but their powers are similar to a devil's, what would you do? Like the beast in Revelation that was wounded by a sword but lived. You're asking quite strange, fanciful questions. Unlike yourself? I apologize. Not at all. That's an interesting question. But since I don't think I'll ever meet such a being, it's hard to gauge. Still, well, I'd prefer any being I meet to be an angel, wouldn't I? Meeting a demon would mean hell for me. Though I'm not sure if I could meet an angel. Still, since it was her lover's question, she answered sincerely. Chapter 165. Voiceless Emperor. 4. Drake, who was always strange but suddenly became stranger, and Raleigh, who suddenly seemed devout and asked peculiar questions. The timing overlaps. Could there be a connection? I don't know. Anyway, Elizabeth returned to her peaceful daily life. Tell James. Tell him not to touch the royal property. Yes, Your Majesty. One more thing. Tell him not to do anything strange. The information coming to me is oddly contradictory. It must be his mischief. She also freely gave advice to James, who must be struggling now. Ugh, Yua. I got it. Well done. Didn't I tell you? You'll improve at bowling with some practice. She also enjoyed leisure sports with the so-called St. Margaret. Tell them to extend the room more to the left. And I'd like my emblem engraved here. I'll relay that exactly, Your Majesty. She also diligently modified this cramped, by the Queen's standards, mansion in Roanoke according to her taste. She had returned to such a quiet, comfortable, and cozy daily life. It was something she had been longing for since her teens, after about 50 years. A completely safe life. Living in a house where no one within hundreds of miles wanted to kill her, with people who had no sharp ambitions or thoughts of using her, without the need to exhaustingly hide her emotions. Such a life. Finally, she had attained it. Only in her old age, only after fleeing across the Atlantic, had she barely achieved it. The result was slightly boring and empty. Here, there was no thrill. That feeling when someone held a knife to her neck, and she precariously reigned over everyone else, avoiding that knife as if performing acrobatics. That kind of pleasure? In the court of London, such heart-pounding fear and euphoria always flared up like flames. Like breathing in and out, she inhaled all sorts of desires and conspiracies and exhaled victories filled with joy, and that sensation dominated her entire body. Had she always liked this? It doesn't seem so. Just to avoid death, as she was chased and chased others, such a life had transformed her. Being pushed into situations where she had to kill to avoid being killed, where she had to win power struggles by any means or die, she changed herself to survive. Perhaps, a change that began when she was very young. Desires that now felt as comfortable and natural as skin covered her soul. No, let's be more direct. She enjoyed killing and being killed. Naturally, the killing part was more enjoyable. Especially crushing those insolent ones who tried to kill her under her heel brought pleasure that dominated her entire body. Still, well, I'd prefer any being I meet to be an angel, wouldn't I? Meeting a demon would mean hell for me. It was a lie. Elizabeth wished to meet nothing at all. In a world without God, angels, heaven, or demons, there would be no hell either. Elizabeth suddenly wakes from drowsiness and opens her eyes. Margaret Lawrence was quietly sitting beside her, preparing nutritional supplements for her. Margaret. Yes, Your Majesty. Do you want to meet an angel? Pardon. Just as I said. No. A strange thought just occurred to me. Elizabeth looked at Margaret with a nonchalant face and said, Do you really want to meet an angel? Really? Having read the implied meaning of that word, Margaret's slightly stiffened face relaxed into a small smile. Oh, of course. Don't they say that people will eventually become like angels? Surely, seeing an angel would bring joy. When they rise from the dead, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. Rip. The Queen watches as Margaret tears open a packet to extract medicine and then says, That's a verse from Mark 12. Indeed it is. So you believe that you will rise from among the dead. The Queen's tired and languid eyes close and open, capturing Margaret's face. How nice. Pardon. I will go to hell. The Queen thinks with a smirk. Yes. She is someone who enjoys slaughter and has thrown hundreds, thousands of lives into flames. She would surely go to hell. If she had only killed Catholics, perhaps it would be different. But the violence and death she bestowed were fair to all who opposed her power. Daggers, poison, gallows, and stakes were her weapons. But what could she have done? If I hadn't, I would have died. The father she remembered was a lustful and neurotic madman. He changed churches to obtain a beautiful new wife, and when it seemed that new wife couldn't bear a son, he killed her. That new wife was Elizabeth's mother. Elizabeth was hated by the public from birth, checked by her siblings, and the target of numerous conspiracies. After her mother died, the husband of her stepmother tried to touch her body, because she was the heir to the throne. Her sister tried to kill her, and she waited, holding her breath, for that hateful woman to expire. There was no fantasy as absurd as the bond between blood relatives. Morality, law, faith, love all were mere jokes. Only power obtained by spilling blood was steadfast. So she sought power. Was that a sin? Was it wrong? Perhaps it was. So if there is a God, she would go to hell. The queen is already 68 years old. It won't be long. If only she could grow old forever. If, instead of eternal punishment awaiting after death, only this boring life continued forever. Even if her body became weaker day by day, even if the beauty of the Virgin Queen that everyone praised disappeared. Just one question she wanted to ask. Is it a sin to kill in order to live? So why was I thrown into such a life? Perhaps I should have died long ago, without being corrupted by power, without ascending to the throne. If she had died as she was, she could have gone to heaven. Like Jane Grey, who died just 9 days after ascending the throne, or the foolish Mary of Scotland. Like that, snap, Margaret flicks her finger. The sound wakes the queen from her contemplation. No one can know whether a person will be saved or not. Everyone just follows the Lord within them to be saved. Besides, Your Majesty going to hell? I don't know, it's beyond my realm of knowledge, but I don't think the Lord would abandon Your Majesty. The startled queen stares intently at Margaret. Then, belatedly blushing, Margaret pretends to pray with her hands together and avoids eye contact. If you like, I could pray for Your Majesty. Elizabeth smiles at Margaret's demeanor and pokes her side. Don't act as if you really received an angel's revelation. You're too immersed in your role. Well, I'll at least say thank you, since I'm a person with that much decency. The queen let out a laugh that sounded like a cough. For a long time, such a laugh, whether bitter or otherwise, remained like a scar on the queen's lips. Time passed like that. Your Majesty, an invitation from Nemo has arrived. Nemo? It's the Emperor's name. The Emperor and she were ready to meet. Chapter 166. Leading the Flock 1. The orders of Spanish King Philip III were immediately transmitted to the Council of the Indies, Consejo de las Indias, the most important administrative body exerting influence over Spanish America, and the council made a judgment regarding the royal command. Nonsense. More precisely, nonsense. How are we supposed to capture the Queen? It was as stated above. All the Council of the Indies and its subordinate officials screamed in unison. It was a foolish judgment even to those ignorant of the local circumstances in the American colonies, but to them it was a disastrous decision. To others, all that was visible was the international diplomatic stage surrounding Queen Elizabeth and the internal political circumstances of England. But they had detailed maps and exploration records of the area near Roanoke Island where Queen Elizabeth resided. Therefore, their conclusion was clear. Sending soldiers to Roanoke Island now is no different from sending them to their deaths. Even setting aside everything else and looking at it purely geographically, Queen Elizabeth's residence on Roanoke Island was extremely difficult to attack. The island, situated inside Pamlico Sound, was protected by complex rapids and reefs, and was surrounded by other islands like a barrier. In such an environment where simply landing was difficult, what if there were troops constantly monitoring and defending the place, along with various defensive installations? The difficulty of conquest would increase exponentially. In other words, there was a high probability of wastefully spending many troops and warships without even capturing the Queen. But what choice do we have? These are royal orders, commands issued by the most noble and exalted authority in this kingdom. We cannot disobey. True, we can't disobey. But wasn't this council established to advise His Majesty? Perhaps we could try to persuade him somehow. Already failed. It was a bleak situation. The military conquest of Virginia had already been concluded to be virtually impossible without mobilizing substantial forces. In such a situation, to carry out the king's orders, they would have to prepare for massive loss of life and property. That couldn't be done. For now, while following His Majesty's orders, we need to approach this differently. Since success is unlikely, we should first think about how to show our sincerity rather than achieving the objective itself. Thus, the goal of capturing the queen was shipwrecked from the start. Failure was already predetermined. Instead, they set a target to present to the king as an excuse. That is, when saying, "Everyone fought valiantly, but we failed to capture the Queen of England this time. However, we achieved those subsidiary accomplishments. They could easily think of them. We should focus on checking the Virginia colony and breaking its growth momentum. Everyone, be tense. What we are about to discuss must not leak out." Thus, the conference continued for several weeks. They reached a conclusion. Soon, the council's orders were delivered to the Viceroyalty of New Spain. Amy Amio. Having written those 4 letters on paper, Elizabeth stared at him blankly before smiling slightly. Nemo. An interesting name. Did he perhaps receive a new name when baptized?
No.
I heard he originally had that name. Really? No one. How peculiar. Truly peculiar. At Margaret's words, the Queen stroked her lips. I don't remember exactly, but what's the plan ahead? Yes, first, he will come directly to Roanoke Island to escort your majesty. Then, after guiding you to Chesapeake Bay, the formal talks will begin. You said the emperor has lost his voice? And that conversation must be conducted through written notes. Yes. That's unfortunate. A native who has learned Latin and English must surely possess tremendous intellect. Elizabeth murmured thus and then asked Margaret. You said you've met the emperor before. What? Ah, yes. What was your impression? Please tell me in detail about his appearance, manner, and so on. As soon as the Queen asked that question, Margaret seemed to pause momentarily, then spoke as if reciting. He is hard to express in words. Not again. This isn't the first time she's asked this question. The native emperor has been a crucial ally who played a key role in expanding her royal authority over the past decade. Naturally, she had asked Margaret, Raleigh, and others several questions about him. And every time, those who heard the questions invariably showed the same expression. Ah, he is noble, and that expression, a reverence for the unknown, is glimpsed in their eyes. Unconsciously, they adopt a respectful posture and modulate their voice, as if he were watching from nearby. The emperor's true identity is probably. He must be a sea monster. Suddenly remembering the foolish conversation with Drake, her interest wanes. In the end, the facts the Queen knows about this Nemo are only 2. That he exudes an atmosphere hard to express in words, and that he might be a sea monster. Come to think of it, it seems there's only one fact she knows. The Queen lightly touches Margaret, who still has a dreamy expression, to wake her up. Oh, where was I? You haven't said anything yet except that he's noble. Phew, never mind. At least tell me about his attire. He doesn't walk around half-naked like other natives. Does he? What's wrong? Does he also walk around half-naked?
No.
That's not the case. However, this can't also be difficult to express in words, can it? You're right. It's difficult to express in words. It's always like this, so it's bound to be perplexing. They are now near the port of Chesapeake Bay. That means they will meet the emperor soon. Yet she still knew nothing about the emperor, due to those strange reactions people show whenever she asks about the emperor. Elizabeth sighed and touched her forehead. Very well. If both atmosphere and attire are difficult to express, what choice do I have? Anyway, at least I know he doesn't walk around naked.
I'm sorry.
Not at all. Just tell me about the emperor's appearance. That shouldn't be difficult to express in words, should it? Oh, of course. First, he has slightly curly black hair and deep brown eyes. Margaret stands up, stretches her arms upward, and says, and his height is about this much. That's quite tall. Yes. Additionally, his skin was clean, and his body was moderately slender but muscular. What about his beard? Pardon? He doesn't grow a beard. If he were smaller in stature, he might have been mistaken for a boy. Mistaken for a boy? Exactly how old is the emperor? That. Perhaps he seems to be in his 20s. Then when you first saw him, was he a teenager? With that casual remark, Margaret suddenly hesitated and stopped speaking. No, if he's in his 20s now, he would have been a teenager about 10 years ago, wouldn't he? Isn't that obvious? Well, thinking about it again, he could also be in his 30s. I wonder what she actually knows. As the awkward silence continued, someone knocked on the door. As the two went out of the cabin and onto the deck, everyone was busy. Approaching the railing, thousands of people had gathered around the port. Through them, one person came out and entered the gangway, stopping right in front of Elizabeth. "Walter, Your Majesty." It was Raleigh. Margaret had already moved away from her side, hopping onto the gangway and mixing with the people. In the distance, people welcoming her could be seen. Thus, with just the two of them left, Raleigh bowed to the Queen. "Let's go. He is waiting." "Yes, the man called Nemo." "Yes, Nemo is waiting." What a curious name, isn't it? Like Odysseus trying to capture Polyphemus. I hope he doesn't stab my eye and tell me his real name when I enter his dwelling. The Queen made this joke with a quiet smile. And as she looked at her lover's face again, "Water." His expression was strangely rigid. For a moment, keeping silent, he soon seemed to realize his mistake and spoke again with a gentle smile. "Don't laugh too much. Can't you see his humility in that name?" "Humility?" "Yes, the natives here often change their own names. He, too, probably named himself thus to signify that before the Lord, he remains a being of nothing, a being of no one." Did he perhaps receive a new name when baptized?
No.
I heard he originally had that name. Why do you ask? At Raleigh's words, the Queen recalled the conversation she had with Margaret in the cabin. According to what I heard from Margaret, the name Nemo was definitely originally his, that its overlap with Latin was just a coincidence. Walter. Margaret must have been mistaken. As far as I know, he chose that name to draw closer to the Lord. This is truly strange. Neither age nor the circumstances of naming nothing is certain. Chapter 167. Leading the Flock, 2. As the Queen walked off the gangway with a puzzled look, native soldiers pushed back the onlookers. The English cheered and stretched out their hands toward her, while others blinked curiously as they looked at her. The Queen and Raleigh walked along the path made by soldiers through those crowds. After boarding a carriage and moving, the following crowd gradually diminished. The village of green-roofed houses gradually disappeared behind them, and neatly divided farmlands came into view. Elizabeth asked Raleigh, who was sitting beside her, "Did you say we're going to where the cathedral is?" "More precisely, we're going to where the cathedral is being built." "Is it still under construction?" "Yes, we're building it by importing materials from England and France. Many others are also generously contributing donations and service. Look, those farmlands over there belong to the English. All that vast land was given freely by him. The wheat and potatoes from there feed the poor in England. It seems exactly as was advertised." After hearing more explanations about this community, the carriage soon stops in front of the cathedral. Then, Raleigh quietly opens the carriage door to help her alight. Through the open door, a corridor covered with fur pelts can be seen. With long benches arranged on both sides, it looked like a chapel. Though still small in scale and with the roof not properly built, leaving the sky exposed, inside people were gathered densely. Upon seeing Elizabeth, they all quickly rose and awkwardly bowed to her. Recalling what she had just heard from Raleigh about the shoddiness of this ceremony, Elizabeth remembered that here, the right to become a member of Parliament is given regardless of status. Those gathered here were the members and Parliament leading this community. And beyond those members, at the end of the corridor, there was a platform. One person was standing on it. Her aged eyes could only show a blurry outline of that person standing in the distance. Nevertheless, Elizabeth could guess who he was. As she approached the platform with Raleigh's guidance, the previously blurry image gradually became clearer. Slightly curly black hair, deep brown eyes, clean without a beard, a boyish face. Upon seeing that face, Elizabeth momentarily paused. In his gaze, there was a mineral-like calmness. His firmly closed lips and straight nose solidified an impression of composure and firmness. A distinctive resilience of someone who has lived through long years emanated like a body scent. And all those elements created a perfect disharmony with his boyish face. Elizabeth was momentarily flustered by that strange sensation and looked around. Looking closely, everyone here was holding bread and wine. Come to think of it, today was Sunday. The emperor distributed the bread and wine he was holding to everyone, then offered it to the queen as well. Of course, Elizabeth declined. She is the head of the Church of England. She couldn't receive the Eucharist from someone who hadn't received the sacrament of ordination in the Church of England. Fortunately, the emperor didn't seem to feel any displeasure at being refused, and after sharing bread and wine with everyone, he approached her. During this time, Walter Raleigh stepped forward as the Queen's vassal and spoke. Elizabeth, the rightful Queen of England, France, and Ireland, and defender of the faith, has visited the territory of Nemo, the sovereign of the Virginia community. To this, the emperor smiled and slightly bowed his head. At his gesture, the woman beside him brought a notebook and handed it to him. She was a woman the queen knew, Eleanor. The emperor scribbled something in the notebook and handed it to Eleanor. Then Eleanor spoke on behalf of the emperor. Our community welcomes your majesty, the Queen of England, France, and Ireland. Then all the members gathered here simultaneously bowed to Elizabeth. Elizabeth looked around and opened her mouth. Emperor, I hear that this is a cathedral still under construction. Is this a temporary chapel? At her words, the emperor nodded and wrote down more sentences. Reading those words, Eleanor stumblingly continued. That's right. The community plans to gradually expand the chapel from here and increase spaces for the choir to settle and so on. But it's still too humble to show you. He looked around at the narrow space enclosed by brick walls and slightly bowed his head as if embarrassed, concluding his words. He nodded and quietly gestured. Then the members all moved from their seats and bustled out of the chapel. Suddenly, only 4 remained: the emperor, Eleanor, the queen, and Raleigh. As the emperor took a seat at an appropriate place, the queen also sat down on one of the benches. The emperor eagerly scribbled something and then tore off the page to hand it to the queen. Queen of England, I heard you wanted to meet me. You must have had a hard time on Roanoke Island while I was unable to do anything due to illness. Not at all. I'm just grateful for the invitation, even if belated. It's quite cozy here. As Elizabeth looked around and spoke, the emperor again smiled and wrote something down. I had no other suitable place to receive you. We don't have many dignified spaces. Meaning there are no larger palaces or mansions here than this. Perplexed by this fact, Elizabeth asks, No, from what I've heard, your empire is vast and your wealth is almost infinite. You're saying you don't have a separate palace. At those words, the emperor shook his head. He had no separate palace. Isn't that dangerous? If there were someone threatening you. At those words, the emperor again just smiled slightly and wrote something. Our community is safe. Such unconditional faith. Suddenly, the queen had to suppress a bitter smile that was about to emerge. After all, hadn't someone fled across the Atlantic, chased by rebellion, despite possessing one of the grandest palaces in Europe? Perhaps, if one trusted one's people sufficiently and if one's authority wasn't low, palaces and guards might not be necessary. Of course, this is our story. Rest assured that separate accommodations have been prepared for you in the community. It's been set up right next door. Right next door. This way. When the queen asked, Raleigh stood up and guided her. The queen, somewhat bewildered, followed him, concluding the early meeting with the emperor. Following Raleigh, there was indeed a quite large mansion built of brick right near the cathedral. As I mentioned, the cathedral is still under construction. For now, since your majesty was coming, we completed just a part of it to serve as a mansion. Is that so? Truly, the emperor doesn't have a separate palace or something? Yes, that's right. When he stays in Chesapeake, he lives in a house similar to those of other citizens. Like a benevolent king from an old tale. Elizabeth delivered those words like a jest and laughed. Raleigh also laughed in response and said, "I think so too." Raleigh quietly looked around at the doorway and smiled. "If there's anything uncomfortable, please ring the bell here. Those waiting nearby will bring whatever your majesty needs." "Thank you, Walter." Creak. Thud. So the door closed. Elizabeth threw her old and tired body onto the bed and fell into thought. It was a strange meeting. Meeting in the cathedral was probably to emphasize that he is a Christian monarch. Gathering members at the seat was to display his influence. There wasn't anything else particularly noticeable. And yet, the Queen frowned and kept repeating the same thought. "It feels like I'm missing something. I don't know." The Queen shook her head and looked around the room. In contrast to the crude and simple exterior, the interior was filled with all sorts of luxurious furniture and items. The Queen absent-mindedly approached a table made of ebony and picked up the wine on it. She was thirsty. As she opened the lid and was about to pour it into a glass to drink. Wine. She felt something chilling crawl up her spine. The Queen quickly put down the glass and rang the bell that Raleigh had mentioned. Then, just a few minutes later, an attendant appeared, opening the door. The Queen urgently asked the attendant, "Answer me according to what you know. What is it that you want to know? Were those people gathered with the Emperor just now in the chapel, the members of Parliament?" "Why, yes, but—" At that, the Queen's face hardened. The Queen sent the attendant outside again, closed the door, and retraced the scene just now. In the cathedral, the members who govern Virginia were gathered. And among the chatter there were clearly English and Spanish mixed. English people and Spanish people were mixed as members. To them, Nemo distributed bread and wine to all of them, even to Raleigh. Some didn't drink the wine, some ate both, but the conclusion was the same. Everyone performed the Eucharist with the wine and bread distributed by Nemo. For a moment, a possibility flashes through the Queen's mind. She opens the door again, grabs the attendant, and asks, "Is the Emperor here a Church of England adherent? Why does he personally distribute the holy blood and body to Catholics and Puritans? Even though he's not a priest, is he perhaps a Puritan?" Then, the attendant, who clearly appeared to be English, "Pardon? If you mean the Emperor, Nemo." After tilting his head as if wondering what she was saying, he soon seemed to realize and said, clapping his hands, "Ah, he doesn't belong to any denomination." "What?" "Sometimes he distributes the holy blood and body to community members as a priest, and if that's what you're referring to, since it's an event where everyone participates, whether Catholic or Church of England." "Nonsense. Catholics would rather die than choose to receive the Eucharist through someone who is not a Catholic priest. Puritans would choose to be burned at the stake rather than acknowledge the Emperor as a priest while taking the Eucharist together with Catholics. How can they?" The boyish face of the Emperor flickers before her eyes. The mineral-like calmness in that gaze, the composed yet firm impression flowing from those firmly closed lips and straight nose, the distinctive resilience that emanates from those who have lived through long years, that united the Catholics, Puritans, and Church of England adherents of this community. English people heeded his voice, and African Catholic adherents followed his gestures. She had met numerous monarchs. She had met numerous priests and bishops. But he was neither like a monarch nor like a priest. Though it was a very brief meeting, she could be certain. Like Abraham or Moses, he led his people. He was like a shepherd leading the flock of Virginia. Chapter 168. A tractor in Virginia. A letter from Florida on a wooden crucifix hanging in a hut. Under the tent spread in front of it, people are buzzing and intently watching something. Anthony Cage. Anthony Cage again. This time, Hugh Taylor. As someone pulls out notes one by one from a perforated barrel and calls out the names written on them. Others mark a tally next to those names, recording the number of times the name was called. It was an unremarkable election. The number of participants was a modest scale of only about 70 people, and those gathered around were not people with great power or wealth. But they themselves were approaching the election procedure more seriously than ever before. Each time a slip with a name appeared, they clenched their fists, prayed, and concentrated. Currently, Anthony Cage has 53 votes, Edmund Grand has 11 votes, Hugh Taylor has 9 votes. Anthony Cage has been duly elected as our spiritual representative on March 12, 1603, and when the results came out, the winner climbs onto the platform and raises both arms. Then, all who participated in the voting welcome him with applause and cheers. Is there anyone who wishes to challenge the results? There was no one. As the election results were confirmed, the winner humbly offers words of consolation for the losers and sings a hymn. Everyone followed his hymn. As just mentioned, this was an unremarkable election in Virginia. But not for Elizabeth, who was watching from afar. Anthony Cage has been elected as our church priest and pastor, and within 3 days, he will select deacons to assist him in his duties. Let us gather again next Sunday. Amen. That was it. At this unremarkable election, a priest was elected. Certainly, if Catholics saw this, they would foam at the mouth and set out to overthrow these heretics, and even Church of England adherents would express concerns about restraining these radicals. But here it was everyday life. Good heavens! Elizabeth chuckled and looked at the scene before her, then turned away. In her country, there were plenty of radicals who wanted to elect pastors by vote. In this Virginia, there were so many things to see besides this that there was no need to spend more time here. She walked along with Raleigh, listening to various explanations. Roughly, when those who pledge allegiance to him send gifts, he returns more gifts? Is that why there are no taxes? Correct. It's a somewhat strange system, but it's working well enough. Elizabeth was already experiencing countless amazing things while touring every corner of Chesapeake where 70,000 people live. For example, there were no taxes to be paid to the emperor in this land. Only gifts. The more she learned about this place, the stranger it became. It was like a fantastical country from Thomas More's work. The Queen mounted a horse with Raleigh and looked around from the elevated view. Looking to the left, she saw the green-roofed houses clustered together that she had already seen. Roughly, I seem to have seen how people live. Is there anything more? When Elizabeth asked Raleigh, he lightly kicked the belly of his horse to increase speed. How about viewing the farmlands? There are tobacco fields and many other sights. Aren't I growing tobacco in my garden now? Is there nothing else? Aren't you curious about how potatoes grow? We eat potatoes every day here. What is there to be curious about? Raleigh, who was ahead, stops at a fork in the road, seeming to contemplate which direction to go. The two stood there for a moment, lost in thought, and then, you wouldn't have seen that. You might faint when you see it directly. I nearly did. What great thing exists now that you're making such a fuss? Rather than great, it's strange, and rather than strange, it's bizarre. It's certainly something your Majesty hasn't seen before. Elizabeth smiled at Raleigh's exaggerated reaction. Of course, seeing priests elected by vote, techniques for long-term preservation of grapes and wood, these things were indeed fascinating. But that's it. She had mostly heard of similar things before. Whatever it was, nothing in this American land could surprise her anymore. Wong, or so she thought. At that moment, a steel monster flashes past before her eyes. Something larger than several cows combined, and taller than her height, though she was tall herself. Continuously emitting vapor, it was rushing forward. Black smoke darkened the air wherever it passed. At that sight, she approaches as if entranced. Though the horse was frightened, she gripped the reins tightly and urged it on. My goodness! What on earth is that? Be careful. If you get too close, the horse will be startled. Oh. Whoa. Your Majesty. Grip the reins tightly. Oh. Stay still. She almost fell off the horse. There was no need to think about how dangerous a fall would be for an old woman approaching 70. The queen urgently calmed her heart and watched the rear of that monster that had just swept past her. It was crushing and collapsing the soil like voracious teeth. Though not very fast, its size and thunderous noise were enough to frighten the horse. "Are you all right?" "Whoa, whoa." Indeed, horses recently brought from England are easily startled by that thing that looks like Satan's chariot. "What on earth is it?" "Ah, didn't you ask before?" "How farming is done after distributing so much land. If everyone is a landowner, and there are no slaves or tenant farmers, who cultivates that vast land, you asked?" Raleigh pointed to where the monster had just passed and said, "That tractor is the answer. One of those machines does the work of dozens, hundreds of people in a day. That strange iron monster performs hundreds of people's worth of farm work. Don't worry too much. There are great limitations to using them to harm people. They're slow and hard to steer. But, of course, without that fellow, our community would have collapsed from hunger long ago, and then we couldn't have sent wheat and potatoes to England struggling with food shortages." Elizabeth, having dismounted, blankly watched the tractor pass by, and then her legs gave way, causing her to sit down. That thing is the foundation of Virginia agriculture? The driving force that feeds all these tens of thousands of settlers and still sends enough food for thousands or tens of thousands in England to eat. That strange monster? Seated, she endlessly watched the tractor plowing the field. "Gee, good heavens! Your Majesty? Are you all right?" "Ah, no, I'm fine. Just a little surprised." "Let me help you up." As the queen staggered to her feet with Wally's help, the tractor had already disappeared as a dot on the horizon. Watching it, the queen asked Raleigh, "Is there also ordinary cattle or horses here?" "Yes, there are. Not with horns made of iron or anything." "No. Foolish talk. I spoke nonsense. Like talking about a beast that eats rocks." "Ah, that machine does run on coal and water." "Don't be too surprised." Raleigh helped the queen back onto her horse with a careful hand. Raleigh smiled gently and brushed off the soil from the queen's skirt. "There are countless things left that will surprise your Majesty." "Good heavens! Wait, I'll fetch you a glass of water."
No.
"I just want to rest for a moment." Chapter 169. A Tractor in Virginia, a Letter from Florida too. The queen trembled, realizing that the shock she had received was greater than she thought. She recalls when Manteo first entered the court in London, how he looked around at various cultural artifacts with wide, round eyes. Honestly, she thought it was a bit funny then. She even felt superior when he asked if England's cultural artifacts were really made by humans, not crafted by gods. But now, she could understand him. There's no way such a thing could have been crafted by human hands. She couldn't even imagine how such a machine could be rolling around in a land without a proper palace or a huge city. "Your Majesty? Are you all right?" Looking up, Raleigh kindly wiped the cold sweat that had formed on her forehead. The queen nodded vaguely, got back on her horse, and said, "I'm fine, but I need to rest for a moment. There's a sandy beach nearby. Let's rest there for a while. You've been through a lot." So the two strolled along the coast for a while. Then the queen pointed to a corner in the distance and said, "Why are there so many broken planks?" "Pardon." At her words, Raleigh stepped out to the shore and looked around. Then, strangely, many debris of something caught their eye. Thinking it might be traces of a naval battle fought in the past, the two soon discover something. The French royal flag. "Has a ship been wrecked nearby?" As the queen muttered with curiosity and looked towards Raleigh, his expression was unusual. He seemed to be having some ominous imagination. Equals. Boom, boom, boom. As the portside cannons all roared at once, the sailors also let out cheers. As the targeted enemy ship staggered and quickly turned, its side was exposed again. Without missing that moment, the captain ordered to reload. The Spaniards on the ship moved urgently, reloading and firing the cannons.
Boom.
As the shell directly hit the mast, cheers continued. The enemy ship, with its sail broken, had now lost both its ability to move and its fighting spirit. And then, kaboom!
Bang.
An explosion occurred from inside the ship, splitting the hull. Sailors who were on the enemy ship scrambled and jumped into the sea. It seemed that a shell had reached the powder magazine, causing a chain explosion. As the targeted ship completely exploded, at that moment, sailors and the captain alike could only helplessly watch the rising flames. They had just lost the most valuable looting item and trophy, the ship. "See, Captain, what should we do now? Now that we've eliminated the escort ship, let's focus on capturing other merchant ships. For now, that alone would be a significant achievement." After looting all the other French merchant ships nearby, the vessel returned to the port of San Agustin. The captain immediately headed to the governor's office in Santa Elena to report, and the clerks of the governor's office organized the data and talked among themselves. "Is this all we report to the colonial government and the council?" "Yes. Since the first stage of the blockade is already being realized, we'll move on to the next stage." Creak. As the door opened, a pale-faced man in priestly garb passed by them. "Who came in here?" "Ah, it's Father Alonso Garcia. He works under Bishop Sebastian and seems to have come for diocesan business." Alonso stored their conversation neatly in his mind and left the governor's building. Then he waited in his quarters until nightfall and, after midnight, he went outside. Some people were following him. "Father Alonso." "Aye. Shoo. You must trust the people we agreed to meet here." "But wouldn't it be dangerous to take a ship?" "Recently, the pace of Florida's development has accelerated. So even if I evacuate you to a safe place, you might be caught again. It would be faster to escape by sea." "Here." At the voice that suddenly rang out, Alonso and the slave family following him held their breath. A small lamp flickered, focusing their attention. "Are you Alonso Garcia who contacted the organization?" "Yes." "Are you the organization's bishop? The one who sends slaves to Virginia?" "That's right. This isn't a trap, is it?" "In the name of the Lord, it is not." At those words, the man called Bishop slowly revealed himself, holding the lamp. His face was covered with cloth. "These days, the Lord's name has become like a joke. It's hard to believe. You might be under surveillance from our side for a few days, so keep that in mind." At the bishop's words, Alonso nodded and gave a signal to the families following him. They quickly rushed into a warehouse-like building the bishop pointed to. Now they will board a ship disguised as a French merchant vessel, mixed among various goods, and head to Virginia." "What did you say? A French merchant ship?" At the bishop's words, Alonso recalls the conversation he eavesdropped on at the governor's office. Be careful. They're planning to blockade Virginia to avoid Spanish privateers." "Spanish privateers? Surely Spain and France have signed a peace treaty. In this vast Atlantic, how can one confirm whether it's pirates or privateers rampaging? Moreover, they mentioned something like, the next stage." "I understand. I'll relay it. Thank you for your hard work. Wait. At least your name." "Tayan." As Bishop Tayan gestured, the disciples beside him blindfolded Alonso and took him far from the meeting place. Tayan also quietly entered the warehouse building where the slaves had just gone, then gave instructions to the Spaniards and Africans there. "Can one more letter be loaded?" "Of course. The letter is where?" "Here, I'll give you paper, so write it down now. This information will be delivered directly to him." Tayan left a letter detailing the information he had gathered as comprehensively as possible. He was soon loaded onto the French merchant ship, leaving San Agustin and headed to sea. And that ship, which seemed to be crossing the Atlantic, turned the direction. "We're heading to the land of the Nameless One," quietly headed for Virginia. Thus, liberated slaves and a letter reached Virginia. More precisely, Nameless One, a report from Florida. "Leave it to Kin Issei. Chapter 170. Shadows at Core Banks. 1. Long ago, we planted an underground organization inside Florida. Initially, dozens of Africans infiltrated disguised as slaves, and subsequently numerous Africans and Europeans were additionally dispatched and recruited locally. Many dioceses were established, and likewise, many priests and deacons were selected, and I was recently informed that they are now spread throughout Spanish Florida. Of course, since the secret escape of slaves and intelligence gathering are the most important roles, I'm told the organization is structured in a way that makes detection difficult. They maintain the organization by identifying and contacting each other through complex yet easily overlooked codes, secret passwords, and symbols, I've heard. As reported, I'm told, I've heard. Yes, even I don't know much about this organization. I've only been briefed and confirmed about the most important aspects, but as an organization that needs to operate with utmost secrecy, beyond the occasional reports and support, the organization itself remains obscure. That's the fate of a cell organization. Moreover, it's already been 6 years since the underground organization began. It's an organization almost isolated in enemy territory. Furthermore, most members must remain constrained in unfree statuses such as slaves. In such a situation, while the organization has matured and certainly follows my orders and serves me, it's difficult to say it's entirely under my control. However, all uncontrolled things have their own explosive power and vitality. Nameless 1. A report from Florida. Leave it. A report from those who infiltrated throughout Florida. It usually contained information about the movements of various Spanish ships around Florida, the Spanish colonial government's attitude toward Florida, and the progress of Florida's expansion project. If I had tried to bring this organization completely under my control, it wouldn't have reached such deep areas that would otherwise be unreachable. I removed the seal attached to this report and examined its contents. As expected, reading while decoding the cipher, the content is digested one sentence at a time. With each page turned, the image of the Florida colony, which I've never visited, begins to appear through a distorted lens. Unfortunately, it's progressing smoothly. Those newly migrating to the colony are increasing day by day, and the number of slaves being moved there is also growing. But since our underground organization is also expanding rapidly in proportion, not all the news was bad. I took comfort in that fact and turned another page of the report. Spanish colonial government's movement regarding Virginia. My eyes were fixed on that phrase. ==. The Viceroy of New Spain, Juan de Mendoza y Luna, was a diligent nobleman. Having secured the position of Viceroy of New Spain, moving on to become Viceroy of Peru would be no challenge at all. And once settled as Viceroy of Peru, silver would flow in on its own, and based on that enormous silver, he could vigorously ascend in central politics. Such thoughts were embedded in the mind of the youngest Viceroy of New Spain. The Council of the Indies has sent down orders to check Virginia. In this situation, the Council of the Indies sent an order. Clearly, in one part, there was a royal command to capture Queen Elizabeth, who is in exile on Roanoke Island. But, through all the context before and after, the Council was screaming, begging not to do that. Yes, this meant that even the Council of the Indies, which should act as the representative of royal authority to check the local viceroy, was struggling. Normally, in such a situation, this Council of the Indies would soon be replaced by those close to the Duke of Lerma, the king's favorite, but until then, even the council had no choice but to rely on him. Various checks and yokes given to the Viceroy of New Spain were momentarily released. He knew well what he needed to do to avoid bloodshed while staying on his path to promotion. First, he needed to give an indication that he had adequately, diligently, and properly carried out the king's orders. At the same time, to avoid being evaluated as incompetent, he needed to establish appropriate merits. Juan de Mendoza began to devise a plan as carefully as possible, in a way that wouldn't create any self-inflicted wounds. According to recent records from exploratory parties sent from France, Denmark, etc., the domain of that emperor is very wide and vast. However, it seems their control is not high, meaning their defense and surveillance networks are inevitably spread wide and thin. Then we can proceed a bit more radically. Virginia is currently making huge profits by trading with England and France. To wither them, we must cut off that trade route. No matter how incompetent and irresponsible the king might be, no matter how corrupt his favorite might be, the bureaucratic organization built by Philip II throughout his lifetime had not yet collapsed. The sophisticated state system he had created with blood and sweat was still rolling, guiding the state of Spain to move on a rational path. The Council of the Indies and the Viceroyalty moved in that way. The reason, wealth, and system of the great empire operated that way, interlocking like gears. Even if the king's irrationality loosened the tightening of those gears and inserted foreign matter into the seams, that huge machine didn't break down immediately. Deliberately shoddy privateering licenses were issued in large numbers. The shipowners who bought them immediately led fleets toward the Caribbean, the eastern coast of North America, and as far as Greenland and Ireland, beginning to plunder English merchant ships. Additionally, even French ships with which they had signed peace treaties. Thus, the Atlantic trade networks of England, Scotland, and France began to be disrupted and collapsed. Among them, the young Viceroy of New Spain particularly dispatched colonial government warships to the waters near Virginia and several points. Remember, their colony is self-sufficient. To pose a definite threat to them, I understand, Your Excellency, with a special purpose. Widespread attacks and looting of English and French vessels from Spain in progress. Aim to contract trade with Virginia. And mentioned the next stage. Pay attention. The most important conclusion of this letter: ships near Virginia are being attacked regardless of nationality. As a result, French merchants coming to Virginia have greatly decreased. Chapter 171. Shadows at Core Banks. 2. It wasn't for nothing that there were disruptions in the supply of materials for the cathedral construction. This letter was written at least a few weeks ago. Come to think of it, Raleigh recently said he saw debris from a French ship washed ashore. There must have been a battle nearby. The French might just think it was the work of pirates, but it was more likely due to systematic interference by the Spanish. France is a country that has signed a peace treaty with Spain. If France learns the truth and Henri IV lodges a formal protest, it would become difficult for them to continue such attacks. But they must know that too. Moreover, what is the next stage mentioned in the letter? Thump, 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 thump. Suddenly, footsteps are heard from outside. As I rise, someone urgently opens the door with a knock. It was Manteo. It's serious. Just now, merchants from the port of trade were whispering news. What is it, Manteo? The Spanish are setting up a base at Core Banks. What? When did you hear this? Just now. A passing French merchant ship confirmed Spanish flags flying at Core Banks. What's the scale? At least 200 people. To be precise, it was in the direction of Cape Lookout. Contact Vicente immediately. Core Banks is less than 100 kilometers from Croton Island. 200 Spaniards are starting to build a base in such a place. Can we stop them immediately? Exactly what did they see? Did you ask whether their base is well constructed, if they are really Spanish, things like that? Of course. They seem to have just started fortification, so to proceed with landing and attack now. It's too late. If the enemy's number around 200, we'd need to mobilize hundreds of troops too. To think we noticed so late that an enemy base was being built right in front of us. It's because all the natives around wanted to settle near Chesapeake Bay, leaving the land empty. Additionally, with most ships redirected to gift trade, there were gaps in the surveillance network. They've squeezed through that gap. For now, let's send a ship to the area to check. The warship we currently have is. We have the Nautilus. Vicente returned with the Voyager not too long ago. Then tell Vicente to take the Nautilus and go check. It's an urgent situation. I skimmed through the report from Florida again. And mentioned the next stage. Pay attention. The next stage has arrived. I don't know what its ultimate purpose is, but the uneasiness wouldn't subside. Trade with England and France was the bridge connecting us with both countries. especially with France when we haven't even established formal diplomacy yet. Wait, Manteo. Yes. You and Hewitt take turns managing the port of trade, right? Yes, that's generally the case, but let's go to the port of trade together. Please gather the merchants from France. Call Oytoten too. What's happening? I recall the reason England and Scotland established diplomatic relations with us, and I consider what situation Henri IV is under. A French ship has come here, but our ship has never gone to France. Pardon? Well, that would be natural. Manteo asks as if it's obvious in response to my words. I nodded to him and answered. Then, let's send one this time. What? Perhaps this was an opportunity. Equals. After reaching a very important conclusion about the New World last time, Henri IV was smiling gleefully as his strategy proved right. Surely there is a powerful Christian empire beyond there. Perhaps the history of Christianity being spread there might not be short. The more he thought about their mature wine production and preservation techniques, the more it seemed so. Plus, looking at them importing crucifixes and various artifacts, it was clear that the possibility of this emperor being a staunch Protestant was not high. An empire outside Europe with a long history of Christian dissemination. Who? What are you thinking about? I'm thinking pleasant thoughts, Maximilian. Henri IV's genius brain quickly surmised that after the emperor of that place contacted the European world, he was building a European-style cathedral, and ordered his royal merchants. Put building materials and various decorations on the sales list immediately. No, just put those on it. Tick. I'm thinking about this curious coin of black and white. As a result, dozens of Othello chips were placed before him. The exquisite wine exchanged for the remaining chips was in his hand, and flawless, shining fur was draped over his shoulders. Though it was not cold weather at all, Henri stubbornly wore fur. It wasn't simple ostentation but for promotion, just as Elizabeth once did. Similarly, as a result of showcasing that Chesapeake Scuppernong wine at every banquet, it came to be known in France by nicknames like the King's Banquet Wine and enjoyed popularity. That's all money. Elizabeth might have made a fortune selling Chine Muscat and various grapes to the nobility, but that was just a seasonal business. But this wine was different. The charm of this uniquely intense and sweet wine was that it could be distributed at any time. The royal merchants sent by Henri IV were making enormous profits by hoarding Virginia's fur and wine with funds received from him. Additionally, by taking hefty navigation taxes from ships heading to Virginia across the Atlantic through various decrees and bills, this too was a decent side income. Of course, since he wasn't exclusively distributing and selling New World products like Elizabeth, there was some leakage in revenue, but this was good enough. Quite a lot of resources were consumed in newly establishing distribution networks and supply contracts for materials from various regions to send large quantities of building materials to the New World. But that's fine. Soon that deficit will be filled. If only there isn't an absurd situation where all the merchant ships he sent are captured by pirates without exception. Hoo-hoo. Hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo. Are you that pleased? Of course. Isn't our long-standing financial problem about to be resolved? Henri IV believed so without a doubt. And several months later, he lost the world. Chapter 172. Royal License. 1. Yes, I've gathered all the French merchants. However, please tell everyone, regardless of their individual destinations, they must definitely go to Le Havre with our ships. What? But some have just arrived and started trading. Still, that would be safer. Isn't it better to wait a few months for those who arrived early than to lose everything to pirates? That's true. Hearing my words, Manteo nodded and called out to the merchants gathered at the port. When commotion arose, Manteo handed them an appropriate amount of chips to ease their concerns. Don't worry, this is for your safety during travel. One of our ships will depart, so please follow that ship to Le Havre. Le Havre is a port city located at the mouth of the Seine River, treated as an important French port serving as a gateway connecting Paris and the Atlantic Ocean via waterways. In other words, we are going to Paris. We are going to Paris to meet His Majesty the King of France. We are going to Paris. And Oitoten, who heard Mantio's announcement, turned to look at me with wide eyes. He seemed surprised because I suddenly called him to the port and now we're crossing the Atlantic. Didn't we go to London last time to meet the Queen of England? This will be similar. But I won't be able to speak the language of those people. Will that be all right? They will know English, so don't worry. I can't send Englishmen or Spaniards, so I'd appreciate if Oitoten could help us again this time. I am honored to serve our community, but what should I do when I get there? Henri IV of the Bourbon dynasty, famous for his legendary promise to provide chicken to all citizens every Sunday, and his trusted advisor Marquis de Rosny, later Duke of Sully, Maximilien de Bethune, who led France's tax reforms. The two would go down in history as a great king and minister who rebuilt a kingdom devastated by long wars. Why aren't they coming? Why? And right now, that Henri IV was trembling and pacing anxiously. The Marquis de Rosny pointed out that his lord had already circled the table 164 times. But Henri wasn't listening. His mind was already in disarray. Why? Why haven't the merchant ships I sent to Virginia returned? Most of the ships I sent. That's indeed the question. It had been months already. For citizens of developed countries living in the 21st century, the backwoods typically refers to places without internet and telephone connections. Places where you cannot communicate instantly with the outside world. That is, isolated places. That's why classic detective novels set in the 21st century all take place in backwoods areas without internet. And when the only telephone line connecting that place to the outside world is cut due to heavy snow or other reasons, people start dying one by one. Is it really infested with pirates? Or did they collectively take the money and flee to another country? What in the... A place disconnected from the outside world is indeed optimized for killing people without being caught. And in this era, the true backwoods would be islands in the vast sea or aboard ships. Therefore, once people are sent off on ships, one usually cannot know whether they're alive or dead until they return on their own. Perhaps never. That fact struck the rightful and legitimate king of France, Henri IV, as a tragedy. Oh, Lord! Do you know how much wealth I've poured into that place? Do you know how much? Unable to bear watching Henri IV now even gesturing accusingly toward the heavens, the Marquis de Rosny spoke. Your Majesty, maintain your dignity. The ships that have returned already cover our losses and then some. That's easy for you to say since the ships you sent with your personal fortune returned. How can just covering losses in a business that should have yielded massive profits make any sense? Oh, please, Lord! The Marquis de Rosny sighed and shook his head. A servant entered the room where the two were seated, then flinched at the half-crazed look in the king's eyes and stepped back. Why, Your Majesty? Forgive me, but I have something to tell you. What is it? A ship has arrived. A ship? At that moment, the king's face brightened. While the Marquis de Rosny was finally feeling relieved, the servant continued. It's a foreign ship. The king's face scowled again. It came from Virginia. Is it an English merchant ship? The king's face brightened again. No, it's not that. The king's face crumpled again. Unable to bear watching this farce, Maximilien de Bethune was about to dismiss the servant. Then the servant desperately called out. An envoy has been sent from Virginia with the ship. They're currently on their way to Paris. At that moment, the servant observed that the king's face could shine brighter than the sun. It was truly an astronomical discovery. Anyway, after that news, Henri IV, seemingly having perfectly recovered his former dignity and wealth and decorum, diligently prepared day by day to welcome the envoy from Virginia. After several days passed, the honorable, sacred, member of the Virginia Assembly, chief of the Chesapeake tribe, and representative of the great Your Majesty, Oitoten requests an audience with His Majesty the King of France. A Native American speaking quite fluent English set foot in the Parisian court. Henri had already collected all information about Virginia through England. He swallowed hard, knowing that this man Oytoten was the same one who had caused a commotion during his visit to London. It is an honor to meet an envoy from such a distant land. I hope my hospitality will satisfy you. Yes. That man reportedly caused a major scandal by saying, "You are poor," directly to Elizabeth's face. As such, Henri was careful in his treatment of Oytoten.
No.
It is. I am pleased to be in this splendid palace. Fortunately, Oytoten seemed to have gained a better understanding of European society, as he simply displayed courtesy without making any controversial statements. With that, Henri IV and his courtiers were finally able to breathe easier inside. "What brings you all the way here from such a distant place?" So Henri asked with a gentle smile and, "Pirates." With that single word, Henry's face nearly collapsed again, but he barely maintained his composure. However, the Marquis de Rosny could observe the king's hand trembling slightly. "Pirates are raiding French ships entering our territory." Oytoten continued his story in a more comfortable and rougher tone. "Pirates are killing the French people. We are also aware of that fact, but regrettably we cannot respond." "You can." Chapter 173, Royal License. 2. By this point, not only the king's hands but the entire throne began to shake slightly. The Marquis de Rosny secretly held the throne from behind to counteract the vibration. Meanwhile, Oytoten took something out from his chest and held it out. A nearby servant hurriedly received it and presented it to Henri. On it was written in Spanish, "Letter of Marque." After mentioning pirates, he presented a letter of marque written in Spanish. Henri IV could easily read its meaning. His brow twitched as if an earthquake had struck, then barely regained composure. His mind began to rotate rapidly. He came all this way to inform us that the pirates are Spaniards? Why? Obviously because it's inconvenient for their trade with us to be disrupted. Why can't they ask England for help? It's crystal clear. Currently, all of England's navy is focused on concerns about a mainland invasion from Ireland. Even Sir Drake, who was plundering the Caribbean until recently, reportedly headed to Ireland lately. Who is in urgent need? Us or Virginia? Having finished his calculations, Henri speaks with a smile. "The bearer of this license has the right to plunder and seize enemy vessels and all vessels trading with enemy countries." "Ah, I see. You mean we are trading with their enemy countries?" "I see. However, there's nothing we can do. We can lodge some protest with Spain, but the problems of private individuals who got caught up while trading privately are their own." The meaning of those words was clear. We won't act for free. Of course, most of Henri IV's personal fortune is tied up in this trade right now. He desperately wanted to get rid of those pirate groups right now. He wanted to tear Felipe III to death right now, but he maintained his poker face with superhuman patience. Now let's see how they respond. Thinking this, Henri IV adjusted his posture and watched Oytoten's attitude. And Oytoten continued speaking without showing the slightest agitation. "Is that so? Then, there's nothing to be done." Henri IV, impressed by that composed demeanor, did not understand what thoughts were hiding behind that unhesitating attitude. "Oytoten, remember, they definitely won't help easily. This Henri IV will be a very shrewd person. You must never show any weakness. If he shows an ambiguous attitude, say this." So, what kind of deal Kin Issei had prepared? Equals. "Oytoten, they won't help us for free, you can count on that." At my words, Oytoten tilted his head. "Why? How can they remain idle when their own people are being attacked?" "Yes, because he has signed a peace treaty with Spain. Besides, he probably doesn't have the resources for an immediate conflict. Right now, our community's main enemy is Spain, and England is at war with that Spain. But that doesn't mean England had any reason to become this close to us. After all, this place isn't important enough to respect a community of just a few thousand or tens of thousands of people. Even so, England formed an alliance with us. The fact that the enemy of my enemy is my friend clearly influenced their motivation. But there was a more important factor. This time, we need to make France our firm ally. And to make them a firm ally, we need to win over their king. We won over England's monarch. Through Raleigh. When Raleigh exclusively distributed Virginia's luxury goods to Elizabeth, Elizabeth resold Virginia's fur, grapes, and aluminum at high prices, reaping enormous profits. With that money, Elizabeth was able to avoid begging the nobles for help in the war against Spain. She gained a strong monarchy and eventually even the power to manipulate James VI of Scotland. It's the same. We need to win over the King of France. We must help Henri IV achieve the expansion of French royal authority that he so desperately craves, and help rebuild France. So just tell him this. I understand. And don't make mistakes this time. A person isn't poor just because they don't throw away aluminum. I understand. I'll keep that in mind. Oytoten nodded to me and recited in English the lines I had taught him. == Royal license. What did you say? We find it troublesome when pirates infest the coast. We want only verified French merchants to come. Henri, realizing what he was trying to say, clenched his fist tightly. His fist was soaked with sweat. Therefore, among the merchants, we will only accept those verified by the King of France. Henri IV finally couldn't hold back and jumped to his feet. Everyone in the court was startled and stood at attention. You mean, from now on, among merchants going to Virginia, you will only accept those with royal licenses? Henri asked, suppressing his trembling heart. And, that's right. At his single word, Henri internally let out a victory cry. Finally! Now I too can monopolize New World resources like Elizabeth. Envoy from a distant land, we shall take your proposal seriously. Also, we are sorry to have made you travel so far because of our problems. In other words, he would gratefully accept the royal license and do his best to pressure Spain. Hearing those words, Oytoten smiled slightly and Henri smiled broadly and the Marquis de Rosny also clenched his fist in victory behind his back. Drunk with joy, Henri looked around while trying to steady his trembling hands with effort. Amidst various reactions bursting from all corners of the court, he exclaimed, "Today is a joyous day. We have welcomed a Christian ally from afar. Oytoten of Virginia, please enjoy our hospitality." So they headed to the banquet hall, and Oytoten sat at the right side of Henri as an honored guest. After saying grace before picking up his cutlery, Henri smiled and said, "I once pledged to my people who have been starving due to long wars that someday I would give them chicken once a week. But I felt guilty enjoying a feast among ourselves, so I prepared something modest." Oh my! Oytoten's expression showed genuine sympathy and regret. Henri responded with a smile. Don't worry too much. As a result of our steady efforts over the past few years, my people can now at least once a month, if not once a week. I too, as a chief, would be sad if I could only feed my tribe members one chicken per week. Oytoten spoke with Nemo's command etched in his heart. Don't make mistakes. Speak according to the context of the other person. What did you say? Not being able to eat one chicken every day. That's sad. Are there so few chickens here too? That in front of you is chicken. This is chicken? I thought it was a chick. Chapter 174. A chicken, a king, and Spain's cowardice. 1. Not being able to eat one chicken every day. That's sad. Are there so few chickens here too? That in front of you is chicken. This is chicken? I thought it was a chick. With a rather sour expression, Henri IV put down his fork. A silence pervaded the gathering. Suddenly insulting me to my face during a meal? Such an absurd complaint. I've never heard in my life. The murmuring that could be heard represented Henry's own feelings. What is this? Does this barbarian not know dining etiquette, or even basic courtesy? Thinking this, he raised his head with the intention of delivering a sharp rebuke. Excuse me if this is rude, but perhaps. Oh, it really was chicken. How fascinating. How did you raise it like this? Did you deliberately make it smaller? The taste is a bit lacking, but interesting. He realized he had been misunderstanding something. After the banquet ended, rumors spread throughout Paris about a wealthy empire where all citizens eat chicken daily. And, did I make a mistake? Yes. It seems you made quite a significant mistake. It wasn't that big a mistake, was it? No. It was indeed that big a mistake. Oytoten, who belatedly realized something had gone wrong, and the support staff who followed him just in case, whispered like this, but Maximilian, prepare. Yes, Your Majesty. Shall we immediately place small aluminum foil coverings on the palace statues, and instruct all palace servants to cease wearing aluminum ornaments? Aluminum shall be exclusively for the king and his guests. An excellent idea. The rightful king of France, Henri de Bourbon, didn't care in the least about such trivial happenings. No, it would be better to increase the scale. Replace all the furred items used in royal attire with furs from the New World. Even the fur used in my crown. Let all those crazy about luxury furs follow suit. What Henri saw was not the minor discourtesy committed by the empire's envoy. Similarly, he didn't care about all the commotion engulfing Paris. What he looked at and cared about was just one thing. Now, trade with Virginia will be our exclusive stage. Wealth. The enormous wealth that would flow from the New World. The cute outburst that this man Oytoten blurted out was actually a stroke of good fortune for him. After enduring a moment of embarrassment, rumors about the wealthy New World began spreading throughout Paris and France. The clothes worn by the envoys from the New World, their ornaments, their modest utensils, and the enormous gifts they brought all became his promotional tools. Yes. From now on, all interest, all ambition, all expectations regarding the New World would be converted into gold coins for Henri IV. Only those authorized by Henri IV would be able to sail to the Emperor's territory, and only those with Henri IV's license would be able to trade in the Emperor's territory. All luxury goods from the New World had fallen into Henri IV's grasp. Aluminum, sweet wine, soft fur, seedless grapes, all of it was now his. Luxury goods are not simply enjoyed for the pleasure of eyes and ears. Luxury is authority and prestige. It's the most intuitive way to display the wealth one can spend and the authority one has built. Therefore, monopolizing luxury goods is essentially the same as monopolizing authority and prestige. By releasing luxury goods to nobles who desire such authority more than anyone else, Henri could devour their enormous wealth. In other words, Henri had gained authority that was entirely his own. Additionally, he had acquired a funding source that was completely his. Across the sea, Elizabeth had used this to suck enormous wealth from England's upper class. And Elizabeth had used that again as a foundation for her powerful monarchy. He too could now do the same. He could slip away from the complex tug-of-war entanglements domestically and obtain a sword to cut through that Gordian knot in one stroke. He now felt as if he had truly become the King of France. Your Majesty, you must be more prudent at times like this. Rather than being intoxicated by immediate victory, you should think about the price it will bring. I am already thinking about the price, Maximilian. Henri IV said to the Marquis de Rosny, Maximilian de Bethune, as he sat down on the sofa as if collapsing. Is it ultimately about Spain? We need to determine the level of conflict we will initiate with them immediately. Calculating change is always the most troublesome part. If we were to go to war with Spain again, it would be far beyond the level of mere change. It had only been a few years since France emerged from war. Until recently, traces of Spanish troops ravaging the country remained throughout the territory. Moreover, extreme Catholics across the regions do not consider Henri, who discreetly converted at the end of the war, as their true lord. They lean on Spain and hope only for the day they can kill Henri. Given this situation, armed conflict with Spain is difficult to even dream of yet. It's infuriating, but looking only at the result, just a few merchant ships have been plundered. Going to war again with the most powerful country in the world because of this level of damage? rashly taking a confrontational stance? Foolishness. But in such a situation, an offer they couldn't refuse had arrived. For now, sending several envoys and concluding with a strong protest is the best we can do. Snap. When the king snapped his fingers, the Marquis de Rosny frowned and looked up. The king was smiling with a natural expression.
No.
What do you mean? Do you intend to go to war? Not that, but would the emperor of that new world be satisfied with just that? The trade monopoly is a great gift. To match its value, we must adopt a more radical alternative. A radical alternative. At those words, the Marquis de Rosny unconsciously trembled. He knew well how his lord had ended the civil war until now, how he had taken this country in his grasp. That excellent insight and decisiveness. A man who seemed to possess the stomach and heart of a lion. If I missed this opportunity, I would be a coward. He rose with a light clench of his fist and a smile. And a coward doesn't deserve to be the King of France. With just that brief declaration, the Marquis de Rosny found himself unknowingly persuaded and nodded. What followed was not discussion but orders. Send an envoy to Spain immediately. Also contact our ambassador to Spain, who should be in Valladolid, in advance. Use the strongest language possible to protest. Let's show such a fierce face that Felipe wets himself. Is that enough? Of course, I am not a coward, but Henri IV said with his neck held stiffly upright. His eyes shone like those of a fierce beast. That bastard Felipe is a coward. So as Oitotin left Paris, another envoy departed from France, and as soon as Henry's envoy reached the court in Spain's new capital, Valladolid, he growled in a fierce voice. Toward another nation not at war, and toward fellow Catholics at that. This shamelessness that condones heinous and immoral crimes. We French will never forget this. Chapter 175. A Chicken, a King, and Spain's Cowardice. 2. At such a high level of harsh statements and clearly intentional discourtesy, everyone in the court was shocked into silence. They all looked toward the throne. Then Felipe looked toward his trusted advisor, the Duke of Lerma, and when he nodded, the king rose from his throne and exclaimed. Everyone, and especially Henri IV's envoy himself, wondered how much dignity and anger the King of Spain would display toward this Frenchman, and if this is, what insolence! I have not condoned such crimes. Here Henri IV's judgment was proven precisely correct. Felipe III, dripping with cold sweat, glanced toward the Duke of Lerma again. Then the Duke spoke. I too know nothing about this. All right, if you don't know, how could I possibly? But look at this shabby letter of marque that the envoy has presented as evidence. It clearly bears the signature of the Viceroy of New Spain. Indeed it does. We ourselves know nothing about this, but it's possible that this situation unfolded due to mistakes by our colonial officials, or those who received the license may have overinterpreted its contents. Indeed. Look, we in Spain know nothing about this matter. We bear no responsibility for this situation. Thanks to the Duke's help, the king managed about half his duties. He denied responsibility for the situation and protected the national officials who carried out the plan. How can there be no responsibility for what happened in your Majesty's government? Didn't I say I don't know? Teach the Council of the Indies. Summon the members of the Council of the Indies immediately. It's all their responsibility. Or not. So the Council of the Indies was summoned and you are all dismissed. Duke of Lerma? Quickly, promote the personnel you recommended. Is everyone fine with that? Of course. Purge was carried out. To the Viceroy of New Spain be it known. You are to take responsibility for the meaningless plundering of third country vessels and resolve the situation. Your responsibility is heavy. Is this really an order sent from the home country? Are you perhaps an English spy? Did His Majesty really send something like this? and the newly purged Council of the Indies then put pressure on the Viceroyalty of New Spain. Juan de Mendoza y Luna, the Viceroy of New Spain, stood dumbfounded for a moment with his mouth open, unfolding the order. No, he never dreamed that rather than protecting the officials who carried out his orders, they would put pressure on them. Is the Duke of Lerma actually an English spy? No, at this level, the king himself might be a spy. If he had told him to pressure Virginia, and given him this much autonomy, shouldn't he at least show an attitude of taking responsibility? Even if not, wouldn't stepping forward to protect his servants when criticized by other countries be the way to show dignity as a monarch? But they're just throwing me as diplomatic food. Cutting off the tail? If you proceed like this, will there be anyone left who will be loyal to you later? No, do they not even think about that? The Council of the Indies seems to have just been purged with the Duke of Lerma's connections. Don't tell me they're trying to cut down the nation's dignity just to behead a few annoying people? Is this the thinking of a king of a country? Juan de Mendoza, with trembling hands, tightly gripped the order, and with great difficulty suppressed the desire to crumple or tear it, returning it to the envoy. France is angry. His Majesty the King pretends not to know. The Council of the Indies pressures me. If this continues, the picture of making a show of moderately implementing the king's orders and being promoted to the Viceroyalty of Peru within a few years would be completely disrupted. At this rate, he would simply be dismissed. If this continues, only I will sink. He must establish achievements somehow. While pressuring Virginia, Juan de Mendoza, with trembling hands, searched through his drawer and pulled out several documents. Letter of marque. We too have frequently observed ships with such things plundering French merchant ships off our coast. Upon investigation, wasn't it the mischief of pirates who forged my signature? The crooked signature on the license, deliberately written with the left hand, was certainly quite different from the Viceroy's usual signature. He had deliberately made the letters of marque shabby for times like this. Of course, he never expected the king to pressure him like this, though he had anticipated French merchants coming to protest directly. Anyway, the Viceroy thanked his past self for wisely preparing countermeasures. The king's envoy standing before him carefully examined the letter of marque handed by Juan de Mendoza before putting it down. Is that so? But as that sea area is under your jurisdiction, are you telling me to monitor the movements of all pirates in my jurisdiction? Is there a guarantee they're all Spanish? Where is such an unreasonable demand heard? That's true, but clearly His Majesty. Are you the only servant of His Majesty? I too, as His Majesty's servant, am carrying out orders to pressure Virginia and capture the Queen of England. Juan de Mendoza spoke, deliberately raising his voice. Is it all right if His Majesty's grand design is disrupted because of you? His Majesty's grand design. Is there even such a thing? Probably not. Anyway, that wasn't what was important. If that happens, do you think His Majesty will leave you be? I am merely an envoy. His Majesty wouldn't do anything to... His Majesty. Juan de Mendoza snatched the king's order that was still in the envoy's hand and waved it in front of his eyes. Will he leave you be? Was I going to be left alone or not? Having received that implication, even the envoy could only harden his face without being able to respond. Of course, the person right in front of him not only holds the title of Marquis but is also the Viceroy of New Spain, essentially an emperor in the New World. Yet they're trying to dismiss him without proper procedure. What about himself then? I will look into this again. The envoy who said this immediately left the office. The Viceroy, who had been waiting until the envoy disappeared at the end of the corridor, let out a sigh of relief. He had survived for now. The Atlantic is a wide and rough sea. It would take at least several months, even at the shortest, for that man to return to the mainland and then come back again. He just needed to buy time while the gullible and spineless king vacillated between the nagging of the French ambassador and the justification he had put forward. Until then, I just need to solidify the bridgehead near Pamlico Sound. I heard there were no natives around there. I heard it wouldn't take long to settle and fortify. All of these are opportunities given by God. What if he dragged out the dispute with Virginia near that bridgehead? At the very least, he could greatly pull the border of the Florida colony northward. If not that, considering a bigger picture, through that bridgehead, he could destabilize the entire Pamlico Sound region and threaten Virginia. They too will find it difficult to take significant military action, starting with the questionable existence of the native emperor. The English settlement would be at most a few hundred to a few thousand people in size, so it wouldn't be easy to conduct military activities on the scale of hundreds of men. That cursed Drake and his terrible friends are in Ireland now, so they won't have time to pay attention to this side. Everything is a race against time, just until the chaos between England and Ireland subsides, just until the king does something foolish again. If he succeeds in solidifying the bridgehead by then, it's a big step toward overwhelming Virginia. And if he succeeds in shaking Virginia, that would be even better. Privateers alone won't work anymore. It's time to use the fleet in earnest. The viceroy unfolded something only after confirming no one was around. It was a map of the Pamlico Sound and Chesapeake Bay areas. Now that the path of moving while distributing letters of marque was blocked, another method must be used. The fleet must be mobilized. The plan will proceed without a hitch. Chapter 176, Bronze Cannons, 1. First of all, the chickens were extremely small, and even those, they could only afford to feed people once a week or so. It was such a poor country. I see, Oytoten. You didn't blurt out that impression. I didn't speak first. They asked, so I answered. Pardon. What? What on earth happened in Paris? Anyway, based on what Oytoten said after returning from Paris, the negotiations in France seemed to have proceeded successfully. Additionally, he received a considerable amount of gold and silver as gifts from the French king. They're very favorable to us. Such unexpected gifts. Indeed, the King of France must truly consider Virginia important. When Hewitt and Eleanor said that, Raleigh responded with a bitter smile. Well, perhaps it's just for show. For show? What do you mean by that, Baron? It means France can't directly intervene here right now. Henri Iv's situation is precarious, we're across the Atlantic, and the opponent is Spain, isn't it? Well, that's true. Raleigh approached me as I was examining the gifts Oytoten had brought, bowed his head, and reported. For now, it appears Henri IV cannot provide direct assistance. If that weren't the case, he would have responded with warships and cannons instead of these gifts. Of course, French assistance will continue, but it seems difficult to expect immediate effects. I understand. Still, we had secured friendly relations with France. Even if it wasn't a mutual alliance with automatic participation in war, we promised each other various benefits equivalent to that. The treaty contained clauses for military consultation, intelligence sharing, and preferential treatment in matters of trade and diplomacy. Benefits that would serve both nations well in the uncertain political landscape. Above all, giving Henri the trade monopoly was significant. For us, it was a no-loss deal since we would have had to implement procedures to prevent just any merchant from entering anyway. The monopoly granted his merchants exclusive rights to our ports and marketplaces, eliminating competition while allowing us to concentrate our security measures and customs protocols on a single, trusted partner rather than dozens of unknown vessels from various origins. Indeed, as time passed, French merchant ships began returning to the port one or two at a time, their holds laden with goods from across the continent. The white sails dotting the horizon brought not just commerce but a sense of normalcy that had been absent during the tensions. It was clear that our efforts with France were having an effect, both economically and in the renewed confidence evident in the faces of our citizens as they watched the ships dock. Thus, Virginia soon regained peace, and we were able to normalize the supply of luxury goods with peace of mind. The markets once again bustled with activity, filled with exotic fabrics, fine wines, and intricate craftsmanship that had been sorely missed during the embargo. Pillars were raised again in the cathedral. Their towering stone forms a testament to our renewed prosperity and faith in the future. The construction crews worked from dawn until dusk, the rhythmic sounds of their tools becoming a comforting backdrop to city life. Spices returned to people's tables, transforming simple meals into aromatic feasts that reminded everyone of better days. And I was able to enjoy coffee again during camping. That rich, dark brew that cleared the mind and warmed the soul on cool mornings in the wilderness. It was around the time when such daily life had returned and I was about to invite people over with my camping gear, a celebration of sorts, to mark our successful navigation through troubled waters. I had selected a picturesque spot by the lake, where the trees provided shade and the view of the mountains reminded us all of the grandeur that surrounded our humble settlement. "Ha! What's wrong, Eleanor?" "Ah, no, it's just strange. Don't you see something on that horizon?" "I see it. It looks like a ship." "There shouldn't be any ships coming to Crotone at this time, so why suddenly there?" "Eleanor." "Yes? What is it?" "Get away from the coast immediately with Virginia. It's dangerous." "What?" "And notify the nearby outpost." "Ah, no. I'll do it." What's happening? I can't see clearly." "Whoa!" I pushed Eleanor toward the inside of the beach and started running toward the nearby outpost. And I shouted, "That ship has a Spanish flag on it." Moreover, according to what I learned from Raleigh, judging by its shape, it was definitely not a merchant ship. A Spanish warship had arrived right near Crotone. That's Chesapeake Bay. According to our explorations, it appears to be one of the main strongholds of the English faction. Gradually, others besides us would have reached near Crotone Island or Roanoke Island. The captain had a habit of talking to himself during the tedious sea life. The adjutant stood stiffly when the captain asked a question in a proper voice. "Adjutant, where are their battery positions?" "Watchtower. Where are the enemy batteries?" "That, good heavens. They seem to be spread all over the coast. They're mad." The captain clicked his tongue at the sound coming from the high watchtower and looked out at the sprawling Chesapeake Bay. As he frowned, the image became clearer, and he began to see black shapes moving around the coast. Black shapes, those notorious English-made cast iron cannons. Several times cheaper than bronze cannons while still of decent quality, these cannons had been a headache for Spain. Not only the English but also the Dutch imported and used them, causing significant difficulties for Spanish soldiers on land and sea. However, now the captain whistled lightly upon seeing those cast iron cannons. That's right. They wouldn't have installed expensive bronze cannons all the way to this distant colony. The only reason cast iron cannons could annoy the Spanish forces was simple: quantity. Because materials were easy to obtain and prices were cheap, the English had threatened Spanish forces with numerous ships and armies armed with cast iron cannons. But now they were the attackers and the others were the defenders. They could move freely on the sea, while the others stood fixed on the island. Chapter 177. Bronze Cannons. 2. In this situation, if they fired with bronze cannons, superior in both range and rate of fire from outside the enemy's range, they could retreat without a scratch. The captain had no intention of landing at Chesapeake Bay right now. He hadn't received such orders either. The English and their allies there might number in the thousands, and a rash landing attempt could backfire. His life was precious and, even more so to the Viceroy of New Spain, who couldn't afford to lose many resources here. Therefore, their strategy was simple: harass the enemy coasts while isolating their colonies. Detailed investigations had revealed that the enemy territories were scattered in various places, with massive volumes of goods moving between them. So, just by blocking their logistics, the enemy would fall into great confusion. As he nodded with certainty of victory, the soldiers began loading the cannons. And, boom boom, the earth shook. The unexpectedly sturdy enemy battery didn't easily collapse, and it seemed there were no casualties among the enemy. So the Spaniards carefully gauged the effective range of the enemy and penetrated deeper. And when they were confident that the enemy's return fire wouldn't hit them, fire! Boom, boom, boom! They fired their cannons again. Seeing some batteries destroyed and some cannons damaged, they cheered and returned to their base. Though the enemy's response was so quick that they couldn't force human casualties, their victory was still solid. The Spaniards returned, firmly believing that the reason for their victory lay in their superior cannons. But they were wrong. They knew nothing. For a modern person who might be possessed or transported anytime and anywhere, they didn't know about the existence of alternative history novels, which should be read as essential liberal arts. They were ignorant of the fact that all sorts of useful and excellent knowledge, such as iron and steel making methods, flintlock firearm manufacturing methods, and black gunpowder manufacturing methods, were equipped in them. Therefore, they had no way of knowing the 21st century common sense that those who are decent, cultured, overflowing with intellect, and personally excellent generally enjoy reading alternative history novels. If Qin Issei had had enough time and opportunity, then he could have known the ideal material mixing ratio of black gunpowder. 75% potassium nitrate, 10% sulfur, 15% carbon. Then Qin Issei might have been able to produce black gunpowder of much superior quality than now. Moreover, he already had high-quality potassium nitrate, sulfur, and pure carbon extracted with 21st century chemical engineering techniques. Therefore, he didn't need to go around turning over human and animal excrement like others. If he, Qin Issei, had bought and read just a few more alternative history novels, today's painful defeat wouldn't have happened. It would have been the Spaniards, not the Virginia community residents, who were surprised and scattered by the enemy attacking from outside the range. Yes. Although no modern person living in the early 17th century would think of it. Virginia's fault lay precisely in alternative history novels. Vicente, how many people are currently staying in Crotone? A total of 213 people. The rest are probably scattered on Roanoke Island and around Chesapeake Bay. Ahem. We can only know that everyone is safe. It's fortunate that the enemy is being cautious. If they had decided to land, accepting casualties, don't worry, they absolutely can't do that. Look, most of them are privateers and armed merchant ships, aren't they? Their lives are precious, so why would they charge in? The apostles present here are only Hewitt, Eleanor, and Raleigh. Couldn't be helped. The enemy attacked while taking advantage of the gap when only we were gathered on Crotone Island. With the enemy threatening reconnaissance, important personnel couldn't freely move around by boat. Still, it's fortunate that communication with the outside hasn't been completely cut off. Will that continue? When Eleanor spoke with a sigh, I looked toward Raleigh. Raleigh fiddled with his mustache and removed the tobacco he had in his mouth. Nemo, in my opinion, it probably will. If they weren't being cautious, they would have proceeded with a landing in the first place. But for now, communities everywhere, and even Her Majesty the Queen, are safe. Of course they would be. How thoroughly have we prepared our coastal defenses? Moreover, with at least one musket distributed per person, a bloodbath would ensue the moment they land. I'm not sure if the enemy knows that though. Similarly, the enemy doesn't attempt an attack when our ships are gathered more than 5 at a time. The enemy basically avoids direct damage. Their purpose is to isolate us, constrain us, and let us wither away. If that's the purpose, aren't they succeeding?
No, Thomas.
Aren't we all self-sufficient? We'll never wither away. Ah! However, Nemo, as long as our settlements are connected to each other through the sea, we cannot leave this situation unattended forever. We must find a way somehow. Raleigh summarized the opinions. I nodded at his words and fell into thought for a moment. Raleigh? Perhaps when Vicente returns from trading in the north, the enemy won't be able to attack. There will be several armed ships lined up. That will certainly be the case. Then, what would Vicente do if he arrived at Chesapeake Bay and knew our whereabouts? He would come to Crotone. Let's move from that point. Ah, good. I like the quick conclusion. Then let's move to a different place and think about how to destroy core banks first. Let's do that, Raleigh. Pardon? Ah, do you mean Outer Banks? When Raleigh and I stood up, Eleanor and Hewitt, who hadn't been on many boats, tilted their heads. I explained to them. Look, the enemy is monitoring this area by rotating about a dozen ships. To regularly monitor a distance of over 100 kilometers like this, there must be an intermediate stopover point. An intermediate stopover point? Ah, that's right, Eleanor. I nodded to Eleanor. The fortress the enemy built to the south was probably for this purpose. A place the enemy recently fortified with about 200 people. Cape Lookout on Corbanks. Let's find a way to destroy that place from now on. A little later, Vicente arrived at Crotone and... A way to destroy a well-fortified place? I hate to say this, but couldn't we just do it the way I experienced?
Vicente?
The way you experienced. Getting massacred after invading someone else's land? Or switching sides very quickly, abandoning one's country? It seems there's some misunderstanding, you know? Vicente whispered to me, watching my expression become strange. Oh, quite crude and simplistic. But it would be effective, wouldn't it? Well, it seems so. Having heard the plan, I reluctantly accepted it. So before long, we headed toward Corbanks, towing barges. Chapter 178. Satan's Chariot 1. Elizabeth clicked her tongue repeatedly as she strolled along the shore. Margaret, who was following close behind, carefully approached her side. What's the matter, Your Majesty?
Margaret.
I don't have much else to talk about right now. It was about that. Elizabeth pointed with her chin beyond the coastline. There, several kilometers from the shore, another sandbar hundreds of meters wide stretched out like a barrier protecting Roanoke. And on top of that long-stretched sandbar, magnificent coastal batteries were installed. Above them, fully armed soldiers stood guard in all directions, and expensive bronze cannons brought from Scotland at great cost gleamed. That was the reason the Queen of England could leisurely stroll along the shore. Roanoke Island was completely safe. It would be the same even if enemies somehow broke through that barrier island and rough waters into the bay. They would still have to face the coastal batteries and guards of Roanoke Island. The Spanish didn't have enough troops to withstand such rough landing battles twice. Nevertheless, Elizabeth sighed and merely pointed beyond. Beyond that barrier island, at a distance just out of range, Spanish warships were passing by. To isolate this island. I don't know if we can resolve this issue. Until the English Navy arrives, I don't see a solution. The problem here was that the English Navy had crossed the Atlantic for the battle in Ireland. Drake too and Hawkins, that man died of the plague. Anyway, that's how it is. We can't just stay here waiting for the English Navy for weeks or months on end. Can we? Especially if the Queen of a country and the Emperor of a continent are here. As Elizabeth sighed again, Margaret quietly smiled and leaned on the Queen's shoulder to speak. Don't worry too much, Your Majesty. He won't let the problem grow too large. By what means? Sometimes you all have too much faith in the Emperor. As Elizabeth said this and met Margaret's eyes, she shuddered slightly. As always, those eyes bothered her. Until meeting the Emperor directly, the Queen didn't understand why Margaret showed such fervent faith. She couldn't understand the reason for that reverence, that affection, that passion. What had the Emperor given them? What benefit had he provided to make them act that way? People never give something without reason. So-called gratuitous favor is followed by a price. That was how she viewed people as a monarch, as a ruler. But those around that emperor acted as if they could offer even their hearts. And without any compensation. She had been trying to find the reason that made this possible. She even thought the emperor might have promised them enormous wealth, power, and glory. And she reached a conclusion. He is a type of ruler she had never experienced before. No, he is not even a ruler. Just as Moses was a prophet and God's representative, not a ruler, when he led his people. He was not a ruler. Not a ruler. Perhaps he should be described as a prophet, seer, teacher, or something similar. No, even all those words couldn't fully describe the strange charisma she felt in each of his breaths then. The Queen saw a piece of divinity in him. Equals. What's wrong, Benjamin? No, there. What's there? Ha! Upon hearing Benjamin's words, Alejandro turned his head and saw several ships approaching from beyond the horizon. However, Alejandro, with his poor eyesight, could only see their silhouettes even after furrowing his brows. As Alejandro couldn't see clearly, Benjamin corrected his line of sight. No, not that. Look at the mast. Those ships don't have our flag. Upon turning his head again at Benjamin's words, Alejandro's eyes soon revealed the strange emblem drawn on the sail. The figure of an angel holding light in one hand and a toothed sword in the other. What that figure symbolized was clear. Vi Virginia! Yes, Virginia's ships have come all the way here. Aren't these bastards doing their job properly? Of course, the Virginians had observed the enemy ships' positions with a telescope and avoided them, but they had no way of knowing these circumstances. Ding! 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 They immediately rang bells and shouted to alert about the enemy approach. Everyone was tense watching several ships coming down along the coast from the north. Eventually, they anchored just out of range of the fortress's cannons, then began disembarking soldiers one by one. And, what's that now? What are you talking about, Benjamin?
No.
Some kind of yellow cart-like thing is being unloaded from a wide platform? What is that? That's really? What is that? Suddenly, the Spanish chatter stopped at a roaring sound from afar. It was a low tone that sounded like a giant beast growling. At the sound that came again, they stopped talking and breathing one by one and headed toward the northern wall. The identity of that noise was gradually revealed. The source of the noise was getting closer. No, not gradually. What? What's so fast? QQ quickly load the cannons first. The Spanish soldiers, who had been taking it easy because the troops that disembarked from the ships were standing still, started moving frantically. That strange, cart-like something was rushing madly toward them, at a speed faster than a horse, directly toward this fortress, while all the other Virginia soldiers were still quietly waiting back there. Shoot! I said shoot! Bang! Boom! Dozens of shells started flying toward that mysterious vehicle. Suddenly, that yellowish monster began moving, constantly changing direction in a zigzag pattern. Boom! Bang! Boom boom! Naturally, cannons are designed to destroy large castles or ships, not to chase something moving faster than a horse. While all the shells fell to the ground, that monster alone smoothly avoided the barrage of shells and rushed forward. The soldiers who kept attempting to reload following its moving position soon became exhausted. As they turned the hundreds of kilograms cannons back and forth, soldiers everywhere collapsed and fell. Rat-tat! Rat-a-tat-tat! Soon they wisely gave up on the cannons. They then grabbed their muskets and began firing. However, this time it was even more futile. The monster, as if it no longer had anything to fear, began accelerating in a straight line as soon as they abandoned the cannons. Its intention not to care whether bullets hit or missed was clearly visible. The soldiers who first saw it were shocked, and after a little time passed, they began to panic. Chapter 179. Satan's Chariot, 2. Why doesn't it get hit? Why doesn't it get hit? It keeps coming even when hit. What is that? What is it? It's Satan's chariot. Satan's chariot. I tell you. And as time passed, they began to scatter in panic. Those who were standing on the fortress walls soon jumped inside and fled in a hurry. It's a very obvious story, but whether it's a horse or a person, when there's a possibility of collision with the opponent, they normally slow down and change direction. But that monster, that steel monster, was different. That thing ran straight toward the fortress, and it accelerated even faster. Now its speed had become so fast that it couldn't even be compared to a horse. That unidentified object, which looked heavy just by looking at it, was rushing as if it would devour the wooden stockade that had been cut and erected from nearby inland trees, in lieu of rocks which couldn't be found. The conclusion was clear, and that conclusion would come within seconds. Our run. Boom! The stockade was torn to shreds. The narrow moat dug in front of it was equally useless. As if something had exploded, wood fragments flew in all directions, and people trembled, frightened, curled up, and covering their heads. So, the Spaniards, who were momentarily frightened, soon realized what had just happened. Cold sweat ran down their backs. One side of the fortress had collapsed. They had lost one absolute advantage of the defender. In other words, Uwa, Virginia, for the nameless one. From the attacker's perspective, it was the optimal moment to start the battle. Everyone, grab your guns. I said grab your guns. The Spaniards, finally coming to their senses, hurriedly picked up the spears, knives, and guns they had abandoned and got to their feet. Similarly, hundreds of Englishmen and natives rushing madly from afar also loaded their muskets and crossbows while shouting slogans. Long live Felipe! Long live Habsburg! In the name of the Lord! So that we may sweep away those pagans, heretics. The Spaniards didn't back down either. They were battle-hardened soldiers of the New World. Though they had momentarily panicked, they quickly recovered, loading bullets with trembling hands and lighting fuses with flints. Muskets spewed fire from outside the range. No one was hurt. Thus, hundreds of people, about 1 kilometer apart, were preparing to kill each other. Step. And at the small sound that was heard, all the Spaniards turned their heads in astonishment. From inside the monster that had torn through the fortress wall and was embedded there, scattering sand and soil everywhere, someone carefully walked out. A man emerged from the distorted innards of the monster. He looked surprisingly fine, as if it was hard to believe he had been riding inside that monster. Lucas Pastor barely controlled his trembling body as he picked up his hat that had fallen to the ground. He instinctively took his eyes off the Englishman rushing beyond that collapsed wall. Instead, he turned his head toward where acrid smoke and a piercing smell rose, and he raised his spear tip toward him. Imagine a wooden building standing perfectly intact in the middle of a city on fire. Recall a precarious stone tower that is the only one not collapsed in a world hit by an earthquake. Look at wool that sits alone, not wet, when all the land is raining and soaked with water. As a human being, one feels 2 emotions in such unnaturalness. Lucas felt one of them, bizarreness. A person with 3 eyes, a deer with 10 horns, a dog wagging a snake-like tail, and a person who is still uninjured and intact despite hitting the fortress with all his might. Beings that make people shudder just by imagining them, making them realize something is wrong. Such beings are not usually seen in ordinary people's daily lives. They only appear briefly in a Midsummer Night's Nightmare or fleeting fantasy before scattering. That's why Lucas unconsciously blinked, as if the being his spear tip was pointing at might scatter like a daydream. But it wasn't so. He was smiling at him. Even that seemingly warm smile made his skin crawl. A being fundamentally different from me stands there, taking a form similar to mine. Fearful. Being overwhelmed. I become small before him. I become insignificant before him. Before him, He could feel that such emotions were being shared not just by him but by everyone else. He felt it so intensely that his skin stung. And the sense of duty felt there barely raised his body and opened his eyes. A sense of duty to kill. A sense of duty to kill the being in front of him, to kill that being absolutely different from himself, to banish it from this world. Ugh. But his trembling hands wouldn't budge. No matter how endlessly he cursed inside, how endlessly he swallowed tears, and how much strength he put into his hands, they only trembled and wouldn't move an inch. Toward him the man walked. Step. Don't. Step. Don't. Come. Step. And the man smiles. Finally, fear devoured all reason and will, bringing him to his knees. All of Lucas's struggles, all his shouts, all his screams were consumed by his sobbing. Hundreds of people surrounded him, yet none of them moved to save or help him. Everyone was frozen with the world. From far away, the sound of Englishmen and natives walking could be heard. The man gestured toward them to stop. Behind his back, the smell of terrible things burning still crept up. Distorted metals shriveled like the skin of a dead demon. You fear that.
¿Tienes miedo de eso?
You're a fry. Vaguely, strange sounds were heard, but his hearing seemed paralyzed and wasn't working properly. His whole body was trembling, and, as he snapped his fingers, swish, Behind him, that metal monster melted away. That bizarrely distorted monster, that metal object that had been emitting smoke. Slowly, what couldn't melt was melting, like a pile of snow in the sun quietly vaporizing and disappearing. Just like that, it was disappearing. After everything disappeared, only the mark of blackened ashes remained. Who? What on earth are you? Lucas squeezed out the words, and the man answered briefly, "Fear not." Only then did his ears open.
No temáis.
Non temais. No light timere. Fear thou not.
Ne craignez point.
Thus, that phrase repeated over hundreds of times in Holy Scriptures. That command echoing endlessly from an angel's tongue. That command came to him as it came to Hagar, to Mary, to Joseph, to Zechariah. Lucas could not obey that command. He was afraid. Chapter 180, Melting Steel 1. Lucas Pastor, sitting on the ground, stared blankly up at him. Then that human, no, whatever it was, whether human or not, met his gaze. Its gaze seemed to pierce through his pupils into his brain. His entire head felt hot, as if a burning spear had been thrust into it, and his body was frozen cold, unable to move. All he could do was tremble violently, as if convulsing. He couldn't manage any movement beyond that. For a moment, Lucas thought that man had put a curse on his body. With the power he had demonstrated so far, couldn't he easily achieve that too? And a little later, he realized. What stopped his body was purely his own fear. The man's mouth opens. "Do not be afraid." Immediately, Lucas hears whispers in all the languages he knows. This is like, why should you and I become bloody here? It was as if the Holy Spirit had descended upon his lips. He heretic. Lucas utters words that even he doesn't believe. The man quietly smiles and whispers in his ear. "You are the commander here." How did he know that? I wasn't wearing armor. I wasn't dressed more elaborately than others. I just approached him first. But the man grips Lucas's shoulders, who couldn't even stand up. And as he lifts him up, Lucas's body, which had been frozen until just now, rises easily as if it had all been a momentary prank. His eyes widen at the discrepancy. The man whispers in Lucas's ear, "Surrender and save everyone." As Lucas raises his head, the man smiles. "No, I must not fall for that smile. I must kill the intruder right now. If I had wanted to kill you all, you would already be dead. I did not come here to kill. I came to save." Liar, lies, heretic. The Lord hates a man of bloodshed and deceit. Proverbs 5 verse 6. At those words, Lucas felt as if all the blood in his body had turned cold. The man continues, "Why do you speak words you don't even believe yourself? If you truly believe I am a heretic, if you are truly afraid and terrified of me, then kill me. But you know the truth. What do you think I am? Did you not just witness all of that? Must you really kill all your people here? Why do you deny what you have seen and heard? Why do you deceive your own soul? Why do you hesitate? How can you wish to see meaningless blood, worthless death? Do you not see me? Do you not fear me as people fear the truth? I am the messenger of truth, the messenger of the righteous one. So rise and listen. Listen, you shall not kill anyone here. I too shall kill no one. No one's blood shall flow here today. He will judge between the nations and will decide concerning many peoples. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation. Neither shall they learn war anymore. We. With unfocused eyes, shedding tears, Lucas spoke. At the end of his gaze, another gaze was directed toward him. That gaze says, "Why do you want to fight?" Thus Lucas answers, "I am one who came to fight and a servant of Felipe who received authority from the Lord. The viceroy whom he raised up said to me, 'Lucas, build a fortress and watch over Virginia land as a guard watches over a prisoner.' I merely follow him." Then that gaze asks again, "Do you prioritize the words of the Spanish man Felipe over those of the Lord?" Do you pursue earthly authority and cast aside heavenly authority? Have you forgotten the commandment, "Thou shalt not kill," that the Hebrew man Moses brought down? Lucas answers again, "The commandments do not apply during war. If you are your Lord's messenger, how do you not know this? Do you not know that Joshua struck and killed the Canaanites, Gideon struck and killed the Midianites, and Samson struck and killed the Philistines?" Finally, the gaze says, "So you wish to kill your people."
In vain.
Silence pervades. Lucas painfully turns his stiffened neck to look around. He sees everyone's hands and feet trembling. He sees people who are so afraid they look like they might wet themselves and faint at any moment, let alone properly shoot guns or swing swords. With such people, fight those Englishmen. Fight the man before him. Could they win? The man bows toward Lucas, bringing their eyes to the same level. Lucas feels reassured seeing that the man's pupils are a deep brown, like the earth. And the man says, "Do not fear doing what is right." Clang. Hearing those words, Lucas unknowingly let go of his spear shaft, as if his hands had lost strength and dropped it. As if that was a signal, the sound of metal falling and clattering on the ground echoed from all directions. And the battle ended. Without anyone dying, without anyone killing. Equals. Are you all right? As Vicente, who had arrived belatedly, handed over a towel, Kin Issei smiled and wiped his face. He hid the feeling that he might collapse at any moment and showed a bright smile. "What is there for me to be all right or not? It's fortunate everything went well for everyone. It's incredibly fortunate there were no casualties. In fact, it was a precarious situation even for Kin Issei. In all the battles the Virginia community had experienced so far, no one had died. It was like that when Vicente invaded Croton Island. It was like that when they engaged in naval battle with Spanish forces near Trinidad Island. Similarly, it was like that when Spanish warships fired their cannons during the naval blockade. All those battles had something in common. They were all defensive. When blocking Vicente's attack, they had conducted thorough military training beforehand, and Kin Issei himself had physically blocked the enemies. During the naval battle, while he confronted the enemies with an electric saw, others were safely positioned behind Lexan shields, merely covering him. Finally, when the coast was bombarded, the enemies weren't aggressive in the first place, allowing them to pass safely. But this battle was different.